Hello friends, I am Ufuk Shen. Welcome to the SketchUp Vray training set. In this training content, you will watch the tips for creating high quality and realistic renders in a fast and effective manner, which is my own style of explanation. Friends, the combination of SketchUp and Vray offers powerful toolsets for designers and artists like you who want to create impressive visualizations. This training set will not only convey information to you, but also serve as a guide on how to prepare your scene in other models. Friends, I will explain the complex settings of Vray in the simplest way to help you save time. And this way, you will understand how to achieve high quality and realistic visuals. Friends, in the other sections, we will see what important criteria should be considered in scene preparation. If you proceed in the style I describe, achieving high quality and realistic results in all your other scenes will be inevitable. Friends, this is the model we will be using. We use the same model in the Enscape training set as well. Here, we will use the main menus of Vray for SketchUp and other sections related to lighting. We will continue with auxiliary tools. We will see how to achieve the most effective results at the shortest time. Friends, in the other section, I will explain important tips on how to set up a quality scene, point scent, and a quality model. See you in the next lesson. Goodbye, with love and respect. Hello friends, we are in section 2. I want to say something at the beginning of the topic. In section 2, section 3, section 4, and section 5, I will talk about important parameters that will really create high quality and realistic renders. These are very important parts. Please do not skip these before moving on to the Vray lessons, because many users cannot achieve a high quality and realistic result since they do not watch these lessons, friends. Our first point is the use of quality models. Why should I use quality models? Using quality models is one of the most important stages of realistic rendering. When you purchase this training set, friends, write to me on WhatsApp. I will also provide my WhatsApp number here for you. I will provide you with 20 training models, interior models. Among the models, by separating the furnishings and models, you can create different scenes from each. All of them contain quality models, friends. This topic is very important, and you need to be very selective and do some research on this matter. Along with this training, you can export the models and furnishings you like among the models I will provide and use those exported models within the scene. You can use the models you want. For example, to use any model, right-click and select Make Component here, and then right-click on the Make Component you created, Dika, and choose Export or Save as to turn it into a different SketchUp file. It's a very simple process. You can also perform this process I have done in other scenes. Regarding the use of scenes, friends, you need to delve into the finest details in terms of modeling and design. You need to be selective about ambience elements and spend time on them. No matter which rendering engine you use, the quality model and quality design will bring you success. However, very few people focus on this aspect, friends. That's why I wanted to touch on this part. I will cover these parts, these sections, in segments, briefly. I want you to follow these. If you don't, you won't be able to create a quality model or quality render, friends. One of the essential stages of a quality model is realism. To achieve realism, we need to use a quality model. This is our second lesson. In the third section, I will talk about another important topic, friends. Hello, friends. We are in our third lesson. In this lesson, I want to talk about visual,
to my channel,
aesthetics,
and
detail,
also press this bell icon.
I ask you, as in the second lesson, to watch these lessons and then move on to the Vray section, because I am talking about very important parts. When you do these, it is inevitable to get high quality renders in any render engine, friends. Quality modeling, scene arrangement, and lighting elements allow us to create aesthetically pleasing visuals. Well-designed models and scenes as here lead us to reach the highest level of visual quality. Friends, look here. The spotlights, hidden lighting, lighting pool, LED lights. We are using a mirror here. There are important aspects such as covering the columns with moldings, covering the baseboards with a reflective element in different ways, using a wooden log here, and using concrete material texture on the floor. Friends, more than that, detailed scenes enhance visual storytelling. But when creating a detailed scene, it's not about adding everything you find to the scene. You need to know that there is a certain balance, and you should leave it at that balance. This is something that will happen over time, friends. We will enhance our scene with ambience elements, models, and textures from the Cosmos library within the render engine, adapting to visual aesthetics, detail, and precision. When we achieve this harmony, high-quality models and visuals will emerge, friends. As I mentioned in the second part, just as a high-quality model is one of the goals of realistic visuals, quality modeling, meaning the arrangement of the scene, and lighting elements, is one of the important aspects for us to create appealing visuals, friends. This was the third part. I will continue by explaining briefly. As I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson, be sure to watch these and apply them to your scene. If there are such missing points in your scene, do not proceed to the render engine, friends, because these are very important topics. In the fourth part, I will talk about a different, very important topic. Step by step, we are completing the items and seeing our shortcomings. And later, in the fifth part, starting with the Vray menus, we will move on to the Vray render section, friends. That's all for this lesson. See you in the next lesson. Hello, friends. We are in the fourth episode. Perhaps one of the most important points, establishing an emotional connection and a sense of lived experience. How are we going to do this? Or what do we need to do this? So what will we gain when we do it? Friends, visuals with a strong atmosphere create unforgettable and very positive effects, forming strong bonds, whether with your client or during a presentation. And that visual becomes unforgettable. That's why establishing an emotional connection is very important. How can we do this? For example, in Cosmos, we can make a human character from the Cosmos library. Look outside from here, holding a coffee. Or it could be a person sitting and eating. It could be a person sitting on the couch, holding a coffee and watching TV. The curly shape of the blanket over there gives a sense of lived experience. It helps establish an emotional connection. The presence of the cat here, the natural log, the curly feeling on the carpet, the curly feeling here, friends. The presence of these, the ambience we use or will use being tied to that feeling. Look at the couch models here, appearing curly or old. These are some of the important elements that provide a sense of emotional connection and lived experience, friends. The use of plants, the ambience materials here that will give a sense of lived experience, truly create beautiful topics and beautiful ambiances for us, friends. The fourth item is truly a strong one. After this item is finished, in our next section, we will move on to the individual part, starting with individual menus. Friends, we will learn here how we should approach the stage and how we should look at the stage, friends. That's all for this lesson. See you in our next lesson. Goodbye. Hello, friends. In this episode, I want to talk to you about V-Ray menus. There are actually 4 V-Ray menus, friends. I removed one of them. That is the V-Ray object menu. The object menu is the part where we use tools like scatter, grass, and various others for outdoor environments. Since we won't be using that part indoors, I disabled it in this episode, friends. We will use the V-Ray for SketchUp menu, the V-Ray lights menu, and the V-Ray utilities menu. But don't get confused. Stay calm. Because the commands we will use here are just a few. For example, in V-Ray tools, we will use these 2 commands. We will use 3 types of lights, and in the V-Ray for SketchUp menu, we will use a few menus, friends. I will simplify it within the menus to help you understand better. However, make sure to watch the previous 3 lessons and try to apply them in your scene. This is a very important part, friends. Do not return to this scene without applying them. Now, when you come to the V-Ray for SketchUp section, the asset editor in the main menu, friends, is the part we will use. So look, there's something like this here. Let me close these small arrows, friends. Let's take a look here. Normally, when you open it, your menu will look like this. Let's make this a bit smaller as well. Your menu looks like this. Here are the texture menu, lights menu, geometry, and the channels. And texture sections you will use previously. In the settings section, in this gear part, every time you press settings, these will appear. However, to see these more comfortably, friends, you need to open the arrows on the right and left. Once you open these, all the settings will appear in front of you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson, don't be intimidated. We will make these settings in a very simple and streamlined way. The program already automatically handles most of the settings on the right, friends. So there's no need to worry or be afraid about this. The coding section on the left is where we use the coatings within our work. When you click on any coding here, look, the section of the coding appears. Sometimes a menu called Edit V-Ray appears here, friends. Let's see if one of them will appear. I'm trying to select one of them. Look, these are the coatings we use within our work. So when you import a coating from outside, if V-Ray is set on it, you will see the V-Ray settings here. We will see these as well. We will see them without going into too much detail. I will show you how it's done, friends. This is the coating part. If there are lights you are using or will use indoors, they will also appear in this list. Sunlight comes as standard. There are some settings for sunlight here. There are a few fine details. I will show them to you, friends. And there are HDR settings using dome light. In dome light, look here, we will bring the dome light into the scene and add HDR light to it. I will also show you where to download HDR and some usage tips related to HDR, friends. The next part is the settings section, friends. When you come to the settings section, it's enough to press the render button here. I will explain it in a very simple way. And un instant, we will continue with a very simple approach to achieve an effective visual, friends. There are some auxiliary tools here that we will use for certain texture features. These are important. For example, in the UV section, friends, let's say we didn't like the texture on the back of this chair. Well, normally these UV tools in the tools section, friends, are features that ensure the texture fits perfectly on wrinkled surfaces and organic surfaces. Friends, these two, look, the 3D planner and projection fit feature are ones we will always use. Look, well, normally the texture is like this. Friends, normally when the texture is like this, the texture is in a distorted state. When you press the fit button here, the texture should actually be like this. Do you see? It fits perfectly. You can correct textural errors by pressing these two buttons, friends, in a very simple way. It works on any surface, whether it's a quilt, a curtain, or any organic surface. In very dense files, like those with curtains, quilts, or blankets, but the models can be a bit slow. So you should wait a bit. If it slows down and you click on the scene, a cursor might spin and the program could close again. Therefore, it's beneficial to wait, friends. These are important parts. In the lighting section, we will mostly use the V-Ray rectangular light. We will also continue with IES lights for interior spaces, friends. The menus are really simple, functional, and easy, friends. There is no difficulty at all. Therefore, Yupono-san, if you follow and apply the technique I have demonstrated in your other scenes easily, there will be no problem. You will achieve high quality and realistic visuals in every scene. I keep emphasizing this, friends. You just need to work intensively on the effort, testing, and trial phases. That's all for this lesson. In the next lesson, we will continue by lighting the scene, friends. Hello, friends. We are in the 6th episode. I want to say this to you, friends, for your understanding and better comprehension. In V-Ray, the process usually progresses a bit slower compared to other render engines. But the result is impressive and magnificent, friends, because it works physically, unlike other render engines that work through the graphics card, such as D5, Enscape, TV Motion, which do not work physically, because they operate on the GPU, i.e. the graphics card. Since it works in terms of physical scanning and physical processing, the resulting image is, so to speak, as solid as a rock. That's why you spend a little more time working with it. You spend a bit more time until you have control. But the result is magnificent. Now I want to show you how to create a texture in the simplest way, friends. It's very simple. Before that, we have our V-Ray Cosmos library. Look, next to the V-Ray SketchUp menu, there is the V-Ray Cosmos library in the form of a color palette. You click on this, friends. Here, in the Cosmos library, look, it says all assets here, meaning all these models. You click here, for example. There are 3D models, materials, HDRs, collections. Here, for example, you want the lights from the 3D models. With a click, look, the lights appear, friends. Here, for example, let's say from the texture library, let's say concrete. Do you see it? They all appear instantly. We will be able to use these in our scene, friends. We will use it very simply. These stay handy as auxiliary and supportive tools, and we can use them wherever and however we want. In fact, by changing their toning, you can create many different texture patterns from a single texture. It's very, very simple, friends. Now, let's see how to create a texture from scratch. First, let's see it as a color. Then, let's see it as a texture, as a coating. Friends, normally, you press the V-Ray for SketchUp menu. Look, here is the section where the coating is. I had shown it before. All the textures in the entire scene are here. Don't be intimidated here. What we will do is simply create apply and use the texture on the relevant model. Look, there is a plus icon at the bottom right. It says create asset. I pressed the plus icon. I came to the coating section, the material section. Look at the very top. There is generic at the top. I pressed the generic section, friends. Let's see if I created it. Look at C. Let's press G. look at generic 2. It created it as 2. So I have created 1, 2, 3 of them. As you can see here, friends. I right click on it and select rename. Let's call it test coating. I pressed enter. For test coating. Test coating. Look, normally the color comes like this, friends. When you go to the coding section, the test coding, that is the test coding in SketchUp done, is visible from here. You can change this color from here, and it becomes active from here as well. You see, it's interactive both here and in these areas, but it's only interactive in terms of color and texture changes. We will make adjustments like reflection, refraction, and opacity from this side, friends. Now, let me show you the reflection settings in a very simple way. I can change the colors from the diffuse section from the part I want. Let's say I took the color I wanted from here and used it like this, friends. This is the color section. You adjust the hue of the color from here as well. You also apply texture. Here you apply coating. Wood, plastic, metal, whatever it is. The reflection part, the reflection section. What is the reflection section? If it's black, there is no reflection. If it goes towards white, look, if it goes from black to gray and then to white, that's where the reflection is the strongest, friends. Now, here is the Fresnel value. Look, there is a reflection hour value, 1.6. 1.6 is a certain reflection rate of the materials we use in nature, on Earth. I want to show this in an exaggerated way. 1.6. For example, when I set it to 6, do you see it, friends? It went to values, like aluminum, metal, chrome. You need to find that effective image by keeping these values at a certain level yourself. If you ask what is normally used, 1.6 is used. In general materials like plastic, marble, and any kind of reflective material, 1.6 is used. 1.5, 1.6 is the ideal value, friends. When you increase this, that is, when you click on Fresnel IOR and increase it, the value will increase accordingly. Let's see what happens when we set it to 100. A completely pure reflection, meaning at values of 100% and above, it gives a pure reflection just like a mirror, friends. But there is a slight yellowish tint in the image. That comes from the diffuse image. If you want, we can also copy the reflection image here and paste it on here, friends. Look what happened. Do you see? If you want to use such a metallic look on the facade, it's beneficial to change the color here as well, friends. But the original values are white, meaning they continue at the white ratio. Let's also change this value here to white, friends, as you can see. The reflection event is also related to refraction, friends. Just as we are increasing the quality of reflection from black to white here, we are also doing the refraction in the reflection part in this way. Look, black is black. There is no refraction. When I pull it to white, did you see the refraction below? But the brightness of the reflection is low. The brightness of the refraction is low. When I increase it with this, do you see it? Stays in black. When it stays in black, when I increase the transparent material further, but there is a fine detail here. This is because the Fresnel value is in percentage, friends. Did you see when I removed it? A substance that has reflection and refraction. In other words, glass. We have simply created glass. So, what is it in glass? Color white, reflection white, reflection white.
There.
So,
subscribe to my channel.
Are at the end,
and also press this bell icon.
Create a glass appearance. You create a glass texture. We created this texture very simply, friends. If you want to create a coating texture from scratch again, you right-click again. From the material section, you select generic. Generic 2 appeared. For example, let's say, just color texture. Friends, let's say color, for instance. Color texture. I came here, selected my color from here. I pick any color from here and increase the reflection a bit from the reflection section and left it. The glossiness value is the shine of the light on this. Look, pay attention to the light, friends. Look at the proximity and distance degree of the light here. So I actually created a plastic coating here. A plastic coating in this color. So my glossiness is at the highest level, but the reflection glossiness, that is the proximity and distance degree of the light, is far. So as I decrease this, look, the light moves away. What does it mean for the light to move away, friends? It means creating a matte appearance here. Look, I'm bringing the light closer. Did you see? As the light gets closer, a sharper image is formed. In fact, having the light appear soft always creates an ideal image for us, friends. So, the light shouldn't create a very sharp image on the materials. 060 and 080 images are ideal for us. This can be used on materials like plastic and marble, friends. Even on materials like leather and suede, like 060, 040, you can use values like this. So the point I want to convey here is this, friends. You can create textures in very simple ways, with simple shapes. By increasing the reflection of the color texture slightly and lowering the glossiness value, you can instantly create a coating. If you know the Fresnel values of the material, if you know the original material's Fresnel value, you can also create a texture very quickly by increasing the Fresnel value from here. Look, I'm increasing it. It instantly turned into metal, as you can see. So, if you want to make metal, but you want to make a completely reflective material, it's enough to increase the Fresnel value. Did you see? When you directly bring the reflection to a non-Fresnel value, here you create this value. When you lower it, look. It's a value like this, but the controlled reflection value is related to the Fresnel being checked. Fresnel will give us a controlled reflection effect, friends. So, make sure the Fresnel is checked. Here, we have seen how to create a coating and texture in a very simple way, friends. The values and color values we set here will also show their effect in SketchUp because they affect it, friends. Very simple, very effective. Let's say you created this material and want to apply it somewhere. Friends, for example, let's place this material on this log as an example. We will change it later. For example, you came here, you right-click on the color. When I say apply to selection, friends, look, it will directly apply it onto this. As you can see, like this. And when I change the colors, again from here, friends, the color of the material and texture will change. It's that simple. But as I said at the beginning of the topic, in SketchUp Vray, the process initially leaned more towards other render engines. It has a longer process. But once that long process settles over time, it will lead to you learning faster. That's it for this lesson. In our next lesson, we will see how to apply textures and coatings onto materials. Friends, see you in the next lesson. Goodbye. With love and respect. Hello friends, we are in our 7th lesson. In this lesson, I will show you how to create textures using textures and coatings. Things will get a bit more complicated, but the complexity will not go beyond my understanding of simplicity, because I am trying to explain to you in the simplest way that at the most basic level, these are very important parts. If you know where to place the channels you use with textures and coatings, you can create textures very perfectly, friends. Because using textures is important in Vray, it is beneficial to place the textures in the correct places, friends. I am on the website texturefun.com. I am in the wood section. I downloaded this texture in the wood section by clicking on the 2K part. Now, after downloading the texture, look, the texture channels have appeared in front of me. Friends, this is the texture I will assign to the color section. You know how we made the color section? Orange, yellow, green, red. This is the texture of the color coating I will assign there. But what are these used for? Look, at the end of each texture, there is a name, friends. Base color. The part. It says to assign to the color box. It says height. Actually, it's a displacement map, but we can also use a bump map. Normal map to the normal settings in the brain bump section. Roughness map, the roughness map is the place we assign to our glossiness section. Speckle is actually a texture related to the reflection map, but we won't be using it for now. The lightness or darkness of the texture here determines our reflection. Just like when we were on white, there was no reflection on black, we would pull it to white, and there would be a lot of reflection, just like with the same textures. The darkness of the textures causes less reflection, while being lighter causes more reflection. There is ambient occlusion here, but we won't be using it right now. Generally, in Corona, the part used in 3D Max Corona is more effective in terms of impact, but the part we will use is like this. Now, let's use these textures in a very simple way, friends. I'm going to start working right away. I came back to the texture section from the working section. I pressed the plus sign. I clicked on the generic section from the material section. Friends, let's rename this to wood. I named it wood. I pressed enter, friends. Look at the wood section. This is my color. I want to go to the bitmap section by clicking on the checkered flag in the color section. There is an important criterion here. Friends, let me talk about that. Look, if you start every texture with a triplanar, no matter what surface it is, for example, let's say the surface of this blanket. If you start with a bitmap, the texture on the blanket will be incorrect. Why is that? Because this is a complex, wrinkled surface. In other words, an organic surface friends, if you start every surface with a triplanar, you will handle your work without any issues. Start every command with a triplanar. Bitmap is selecting an image. Selecting an image is correct, but it is correct on square surfaces or on the ground here. However, it is not correct for this type of surfaces. That's why you start with a triplanar to ensure the work is guaranteed. Triplanar means that no matter what the surface is, the surface doesn't matter to you. It means I can place the texture I have taken there. That's why I go to the texture X part, to the plus part here, to the bitmap part, friends. I say gray salon. I came from here and selected my texture. I said open. My wood texture came here. I went back. As you can see here, I see the wood texture. I went back. As you can see, my texture has been created, friends. Now I will transfer this texture onto it before doing the other parts. The wood part is here. I select all of this texture. I right-click. I say apply to selection. And it transfers this texture, this material onto it. Friends, look, now I will gradually show it on the other parts here. Let it apply on top, friends. As you can see, even though it's a sloped surface, it looks like this. It will look different in the render. So for now, we are not concerned with these. If you want, you can lower the tone of the texture from here by 1 tone to change the texture here, friends. Everything is fine up to this point. I came to the reflection part. There is a reflection color and reflection glossiness section. You can set the color part to white if you want. Look, the glare became too much. We come again to adjust the reflection of the light on the model in the glossiness section. Triplanar. I clicked on the checkered flag here. Bitmap. After bitmap, you can choose either a dark or light texture if you want. There will be more reflection when you choose a light texture, less with a dark texture. I am choosing the light texture. I said open. The texture appeared. I came back. Look, there's a slight, sweet reflection here. We can no longer control that reflection from here, friends. Why? Because my texture is at a certain level of grayness. I can no longer change the texture. But by clicking on the checkered flag here and using the custom section, I will come back by increasing the light, by increasing the gamma part. I want to show that. Did you see? So, what I want to explain here is this. The more the texture part goes towards lightness, towards a lighter color, the brighter the reflection will be. Friends, everything is fine up to this point. Look, we handled the texture from the diffuse. We handled its reflection. I came to the bump section. If you want to use a normal map in the bump section, you need to select the normal map. So, to select the blue coating, the normal map is the amount value here. Its intensity is like this. I left it at 0.23. I'm coming back again. I selected triplanar. From the texture section, bitmap, and from here, blue. Look, it says normal. It says normal map. I selected this, friends. I came back. My task here is completed. When I press the render section, I will see this in detail. But since I haven't adjusted the lighting in the scene, the light intensity might be a bit low. Let's zoom into our scene. I'm pressing the settings. I will show these. For now, you don't need to do anything. Settings are on medium. Let the render output stay at 850 by 450, friends. Let's also look at the other parts. I'm not doing anything for now. Let these be auto in the camera section. I will show what these are used for later, friends. For now, I press the render button, and let's see how our texture effect looks to observe the texture effect, friends. In terms of V-Ray render, you need to have a good processor and a good graphics card, friends. Look, I created the texture like this. If there is an issue with the coding in the texture section, we will continue by enlarging this part later. For now, let's do it this way. Let's close this to see more clearly, friends. I need to open the denoiser section here. Let the V-Ray denoiser remain open from the denoiser. I press the render button again And let's wait to see what result will come out. Of course, it is rendering through the processor. Let's speed up the process a bit more. I select CUDA from here. I said to use the processor and the graphics card. I press the render button. Friends, it will render a bit faster. We can see here that the processor and graphics card are important at this stage. Look, it's faster, more efficient, processing faster, friends. Since the denoiser is open here, you can see that there is a bit of a low quality image output because the process is not fully completed yet, friends. The process is ongoing. It's also recording right now, friends. I will stop it from here now. The texture size here is a bit small. We need to enlarge it. We will continue by enlarging it. Let this recording phase finish, friends. As I said, having a good graphics card, babe, and a good processor is important for V-Ray, friends. These are very important, friends, because take a look at this. It finished rendering, but only the color of the texture we used is visible. Its own texture is not visible. For that, friends, let's proceed from here, like this. Let's place this exactly here by pressing this. In the V-Ray Tools menu you see here, these two textures ensure that our texture fits perfectly on the surface. The fit part, over there, friends, ensures that the texture fits right here. That is, the coating fits here, friends. Let's see it. Yes, like this. Let's save this. Sometimes in individual settings, friends, something like this happens. The texture you created earlier appears here, but the most recent texture you made does not appear. There might be a problem related to that as well. It seems like something like that is happening right now. Let's press the render button again. Let's see how it will look. There are such minor errors in V-Ray. Closing and reopening will fix the issue. Yes, the same error continues. I want to close and reopen the file, friends. Then let's check again. Yes, friends. By enlarging the texture a bit and reopening the file, we have created an image like this. So, the small appearance of the texture or some errors in V-Ray are naturally fixed by closing and reopening our file. Don't worry too much about the settings here, because we will change all the textures here. Here there is the texture of the scene itself, friends. We will continue by changing all of them. The denoiser is on here. The denoiser makes the scene a bit smoother. But here, we will continue using these parts in the exposure section. For example, look, I can increase the light intensity in the exposure value here. I will show these in the next lesson. We have used the texture in this way. We will see how we can use other ready-made textures, friends. That's it for this lesson. See you in the next lesson. Goodbye, with love and respect. Hello, friends. To see the effects and values of the coatings on our stage, friends, our stage needs to be illuminated from both outside and inside. The lighting effect is actually almost the same as the effects we will apply in the final stage. But to enhance the effects of the coatings and the ambience, since we will use textures from both Cosmos and V-Ray, we first need to illuminate our stage sufficiently to see the effect of those textures. Also, when we step outside the structure, look, we have windows here. We have windows here. When we illuminate with the sun or with HDR, we need to use supportive lights. Through the windows, friends. How are we going to do this? I closed the toolbar from the View toolbar. Some friends don't know how to open it when it's closed. I closed it to show you, friends. Look, the V-Ray World SketchUp menu. V-Ray World, Light, V-Ray Object, V-Ray, Auxiliary Tools menu. We use this part outdoors. There are more scatter and other summaries. There are duplication summaries. That's why I don't use this. I will close this. I said close and I closed it, friends. Now, in the V-Ray Lights menu, look, there is a rectangular light, which is a square light source, friends. The square light source is one of the basic elements that allows me to provide supportive lighting inside. I selected the light source. I will not show it through the window. Draw anywhere on the wall and leave it. Then do the placement on the window, friends. Look, I did the placement. I selected my light source. I moved it here with the candle, friends. Make sure that the arrow part goes inward. In other words, make sure that part points inward, because when it's in this direction, it shows that the light source is directed this way, meaning towards us. You can do that again using the mirror tool, like this. In the green direction, in the blue direction. Yes, in the blue direction. I moved it in this direction. I also extended this inward like this and left it. Friends, look, it's left up high. I'll pull it down a bit more. Using 2 is sufficient for a window. I pressed Ctrl, duplicated one more, and now 2 light sources are coming in. I will bring this a bit further inside. In this way, we can use the same light character here as well. I duplicated it by pressing Ctrl and placed it here, friends. Later, we will adjust the light intensity and basic settings, friends. Very simple. The lesson will be a bit more fun this way. By patiently watching the lessons, try to apply them in your own scene. I will provide this scene anyway, but it would be more beneficial for you to create your own scene. This way, you will have applied the first 3 points of scene creation and also the other parts. Yes, let's lift it up a bit more like this. I have placed it like this, friends. Now we are moving to our second scene. I looked at it like this. Now, there are some important settings we need to make here. Now the rectangular light is marked. Look, friends, all the lights are marked. Since it was duplicated from 1, all 4 of my lights are the same. So I duplicated them in a controlled manner. With the copy button, they are all the same. Look, it says intensity value. It's at a value of 30. Not 30. Let's make it 60. A bit more inside, let it give more light, friends. At the same time, there are also options values. In options, you need to check the invisible part. Why? Look, normally this is a window door, right? The light value here is visible. When you select invisible, the light is not visible. So, when I look at the window, it means a white light won't be visible when I turn this off, friends. If you don't turn it off, a white light source will be visible here. The background won't be visible. We need to come and check this part right away. There is a tool called direction here, friends. Look, it's at 0. What does that mean? You find out from where the light source will start emitting light. So, instead of from the curtains, when you open it a bit more, look at the lower parts. Look, it actually dims it quite a bit, the direction of the light source. Look, did you see it, friends? When it fully spreads inside, it starts distributing from the curtains, that is, from these curtains here. When you bring it a bit more, inside it distributes without passing through the curtains. You need to find the setting here by experimenting yourself. So, if you don't want it to explode too much on the curtains, you can set this value to the middle. That's the situation. That's the logic, friends. The size of the rectangle light is set this way. If you just want to change its color, you can change it from here. But the white color is related to the standard light color used, friends. But if you want, instead of 6500 Kelvin, you can choose a bluer or different one from here. If you want to go below the value of 5000, you can change the values yourself from here. Let's keep it at 6200, let's say 6250. It normally appears at a value of 6500. In the settings section, look, I'll reset the settings by pressing the gear icon here. Friends, because we will set the settings from scratch. Almost all the settings we make will actually match exactly with the final render settings. Look, I'm pressing the revert button here. It says yes. It asks if you want to reset the settings. I want to reset the settings, friends. I have reset them. I came to the light section. Look, there is an important setting in the sunlight section. The sunlight. Intensity multiplier is set to 1. This is the intensity of the light, friends. In other words, the intensity of the sun is 1. The important part for us here is that the multiplier value appears as 1 to you. Look, the shadow value here should not appear like this, friends. In twilight renders, in night renders, it might be this sharp, but in daytime renders, it cannot be this sharp. When I set the multiplier value to 15, it takes on a softer shadow. There are no other settings we need to make here, friends. I'm closing it. Look, I have come to the settings where I will take the render. I'm coming to the settings from here. If your graphics card is NVIDIA, you select the CUDA section. From here, you check 3 boxes, select the processor, select the graphics card, and get ready for rendering. Now, the medium section is for rendering at medium quality, and when you set it to medium plus, you get a quality slightly above medium. For now, let's keep it at medium, friends. I'm coming to the camera settings section. There's something important in the camera section. As I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson, the settings we make here are essentially where we adjust our quality settings in general. Here, look, there's an exposure value. I say auto. Set the exposure value to automatic. I can later increase or decrease this setting. White balance is the white setting. Previously, there were issues with
Hey
lights.
there.
Let's say
Subscribe to
when
my
there was
channel.
light on one side of the
And
white,
also
there
press
wasn't
this
light on the
bell
other
icon.
side. You also set that to automatic. The white balance and exposure have been set to auto. Friends, turn on the denoiser. We are using Vray denoiser. I turned on the Vray denoiser. In the render output section, I marked this as 1920 by 1080p. In general, by keeping the quality settings in the middle, I have set up this part, like this, friends. That is, the graphics card and processor are marked as CUDA in the render. My setting is medium plus, so at an average setting, exposure, meaning camera light intensity, is on auto, and the white balance is also on auto. I am not doing anything right now. Look, let's press the render button and see the result, friends. Because the purpose of taking a render is this. In order for us to see the effect of textures and coatings on the screen, there needs to be proper lighting inside, friends. That's why, look, we have achieved full light saturation this way. We have our LEDs on the ceiling and these lighting elements. If you notice, as long as we turn on their lights and apply the textures here, we will get a very nice result. Here, look, there is a lack of texture on the couch. We will complete that lack of texture by using the preset settings in Vray. Friends, we can change the colors here. We can come up with different colors ourselves. There are the silver gloss series over there. There are spotlights. There is spotlighting from the spotlights. We have an LED lamp. By using these, friends, we will create a nicer lighting effect. There is a texture loss on the door over there. Let's address the texture loss. We will do curtain covering and gradually strengthen our scene. It's already nice even now. Look, I had turned on the denoiser. If you pay attention to the settings, see how it changes when I turn on the denoiser's chest icon. Do you see? We encountered such an image. In almost 15 to 20 seconds, friends, I press the plus icon and add exposure from here. When I add exposure, there's highlight burn. Highlight burn ensures that the blowouts in the whites here are minimized. Look, did you see? I saw the exterior, but keep it at a certain level so that the setting neither blows out nor dims. Look, when it's dim, we encounter a dull image. When I do it this way and slightly increase the contrast, friends, I actually make the color saturation. And that part, meaning the highlight burn and contrast, compatible with each other. It looks like I will get a really nice result when I apply the coatings and textures. We last did our wood coating. It's here as well. Look, it looks quite nice. Normally, it doesn't look very nice in render tests, but now it looks good. In fact, look, we have lens effects here. Our lens effects make the lights a bit more effectual, more blurred. Look, it says enable bloom. When I press this, friends, do you see here and here, I have created a nicer effect, and thus we have achieved an effective result in a short time. In our other lessons, we will see how these LED lights and spotlights are made, and we will continue to create a nicer snapshot, a nicer ambiance with friends. That's all for this lesson. See you in our other lessons. Goodbye. With love and respect, to stop the render, just press the button over here. After the lighting of our stage is completed, friends, the next step we will take is the interior lighting of the stage. That is, when we provide lighting from the outside, this can also be HDR. We will see HDR in the upcoming sections. Whether it's the sun or a different type of lighting, we need to provide supportive light to these rectangle lights from the outside through the windows. At the same time, look, we need to install LED lights here inside. Now, let's close this. Look, we have a color here. We had previously assigned a color there while modeling. When we click, look, it's a color called 007 Khaki. I'm entering the texture section from here. Look, there's a very simple emissive setting, friends. You press the plus sign on the layers here and activate emissive. Then look, this has become a light source. Right-click on the color section and select copy. Right-click here and select paste. It became a light source. Setting it to a value of 5 or 10 is good here. Let's start with a value of 8 first. Let's take a render and then see what kind of effect it will have. Let's see if the same thing is here as well. Very simply, look, I selected this. I went to the coding section. I pressed the plus sign. I selected emissive. I copied the color code here. I say paste here. I set this to 8 and left it, friends. Then let's see which one we had from our LED lamps. Look, there's the inner part of this. No texture has been applied here. I click. I came here. Look, there's no coating here. Zero coating, in other words. What do you do first? First, you add Vray. Vray MTL, here with the plus sign. Look, the color assignment is done. Then you add the Vray emissive part with the plus sign, friends. I had my color code in memory. I said paste. I pasted it here by saying paste. I increased it a bit more by setting this to a value of 10. Look, there's a metal part outside the lamp. There's this metal part, friends. I selected the metal part in Donla. Look, something like gold or chrome has been applied. Let's quickly check the settings. Look, the color is like this. Check the reflection section I showed you before. It uses a 1.6. The coatings here are full. Some settings have been made here. Look, a value has been set with the color correction parameter and the other glossiness parameter. But the texture of the plastic coating cannot be found. Look, there's a cursor mark here. Friends, it can't find this because it can't find it. It has remained at such a value. It has remained at a 1.6 reflection value. If you want, you can increase the reflection even more by setting it to 2, friends. Now, I came back. What other places might I use? There might be a lighting section behind the TV. Look, the effect here, the silver effect here, is not showing its full impact. This coating, this texture. Let's see it. Let's take a look. Look, this is my coating, friends. Normally, this is the texture. When I select it, I go to the reflection section. I will increase the reflection here. Look, the glossiness is at 0.68, but I want a bit more reflection. I want it to reflect like this. I adjusted the reflection IOR value to 1.6. IOR, refresh Fresnel. IOR, reflection, IOR value, meaning with Fresnel. It looks like this. When I remove the Fresnel, it looks like this. The effect I want, friends, is actually this kind of effect. I left it like this. There will be a mirror effect here on the white, friends. Let's mark that too. Look, let's see. I say edit Vray. Look, because the mirror effect is labeled as mirror, it automatically came with a mirror. So, look at the reflection part. It's marked with 1.6 press. Friends, there's nothing in the other parts. White reflection, glossiness, white and diffuse in the white part. Here, only a coating has been applied, but this coating can't find it anyway. Look, let's do something like this. Let's make our own mirror. I say clear this. Look, actually, it's a more effective image because it couldn't find the coating. I pulled this completely to white, friends. By setting the reflection IOR value up to 100 instead of 1.6, I made the reflection stronger. There's nothing in the remaining parts. The setting is like this. Color is white. Reflection is white. Look, the roughness part is set to 0. If you increase it, it will be a more matte image. Since it's set to 0, a sharper image with more reflections is created. Look, what have we done, friends? We made our LED lamps by adding IES light to the spotlights. Look, by adding the IES light here, we will use them. But now, to see our effect a bit more, I'm pressing the render button again, and let's see our effect, friends. From time to time, by doing render tests like this, you can also see the effect of the render, friends. Look, the lights on the ceiling. Don't look bad at the moment, friends. It left a different effect inside. Look, the silver effect here. Its reflection has gradually increased. It has become a bit more pronounced. Look, it's rendering passes here. It continues by rendering passes at the bottom. These passes continue until the end, friends. This process speeds up depending on the abundance of your processor, graphics card, and RAM. Right now, we are rendering at 1080p resolution, but when it's 4K, of course, the duration will increase, friends. You can also see the render time at the bottom from the log section over there, from the stat section. Look, it says elapsed time here. It's continuing for 40 seconds, friends. I came to the layer section. Look, I'm activating the denoiser section. How many seconds has it been? I came to the start section. We created such an image in 50 seconds. What did we do? Look how beautiful the lights look. Do you see? It looks softer. There are a bit too many reflections here. The reflection on the column. This looks more like plastic. We can make this a bit more matte. Our mirror is not bad. We will make these a bit more matte. The marbles here are shining too much, friends. We will continue by doing those. Look, we can make some variations in the textures here, but overall, our scene looks beautiful and high quality. The reason it looks high quality is, as we mentioned at the beginning, the selection of high quality models, detailed modeling of the scene, and preparing it for rendering. After that, when you do the things I showed, the result is inevitable, friends. That's all for this lesson. In our next lesson, we will see HDR lighting with dome light, friends. Hello, friends. In this lesson, we will see a section about outdoor HDR lighting. In the part we see about HDR lighting, friends, look here. There are some HDRs that we use and will use. The name of this site is polyhaven.com HDRs. Friends, by downloading the HDRs here, you can also use them in your scene. Look, these have just arrived. For example, when you use this HDR, do you see the spheres here? Look, it tells you that you will get such an effect on glass, such an effect on matte material, such an effect on chrome, and such an effect on plastic material. Friends, when you use such a texture, when you use HDR outdoors, the light effect, contrast, and color effect provided by this HDR outdoors will reflect on your scene. This 10K is the highest quality texture, friends. Those using laptops can use 8K. The higher the quality you use, the more RAM usage will increase. Friends, select the HDR section from here. When you press the download button, it will automatically start downloading. We will use this in the dome light section in SketchUp Play, friends. Now, there's a tip here, friends, that I want to show you. Let's close this part and move on. Let's also turn off the sun. For example, here I came to the sun section, the sunlight section. Look, I'm turning off the sunlight from here, from the sunlight section. My goal is to illuminate with HDR. I no longer have anything to do with the sun, friends. I turn this off. Let's set up my HDR section, like this. For example, let's say I want the sun to enter from here, like this. I took the dome light from here and placed it here. Look, this arrow direction shows where the sun is, friends. Before that, while it is downloading, you enter the Vray for SketchUp menu. You go to the dome light section. You open the Use Transform tool here. The Use Transform tool allows Vray to rotate as well. And indeed, when I rotate the dome light here, if these markers are present, for example, I took it like this with the move command. I set it in such a way that it enters diagonally, meaning the sun enters diagonally, friends. Of course, we have curtain settings or different settings to make a more effective process here. We will do those as well. I will show you how it is done, friends. Let's see. If our thing has downloaded, has the HDR downloaded, it has downloaded. I'm coming from here. I took this, said cut. Let me paste the Vray living room part here so I can give you this file so you can use it too. I came to the dome light section. Look, the intense value appears as 1. I wrote 80. I will start from an intense value of 80. You need to give a bit more HDR, power to the HDRs. I increased the intense value to bring it to 80. I pressed the folder icon from the file section here. I selected the HDR part from the Vray living room and said, open, friends. Now look, our HDR will come here. If you wait a bit, you'll see the effect. Yes, it has arrived. Look, I will come back again. You need to wait a bit here as well. As I said, the time it takes for the image to appear here depends on the power of your computer. Now I close this part as well, friends. To see the HDR more clearly from the outside, let me move my camera like this. And let's take a render from here, if you want. I will come back. A bit more like this. Yes, like this. From here I am saying to view point perspective from the camera as well. I am looking from here. I press the render button, and I am waiting. Let's see what kind of image we will encounter, friends. The light intensity will vary, depending on the position of the camera. But we are getting the adequate light setting, both inside and outside, friends. The operations we will perform involve changing the coatings and textures on this sofa with ready-made coatings and altering overly shiny surfaces and reflections. Look, friends, we can see the tree effect on that river plane in the background. Look, the sun has also fallen on the spot where I indicated the direction with the arrow in my dome light. It actually falls to the left side by entering through the window. We will find this setting by experimenting ourselves. But the effect outside, how should I say, is a bit different. Since it's like a sunset effect, we encountered such an effect here as well. Actually, we can do it like this. For example, let me show you from the experimenter. When we did it like this, a slightly different effect occurred. So that dark, greenish image outside was reflected here. But leaning a bit more towards blue, aiming for a more saturated and contrast image, will create a better effect for us. So the point here is this, friends, to use HDRs here by doing plenty of HDR testing. Look, there are different HDRs here. They have used them and achieved effects accordingly. When you come to the HDR section, I say browser HDR. Here. Look, when I say natural light from the outdoor section, values related to sunlight or normal light have appeared. Look, such an effect looks quite nice too. Do you see? A sunny effect, friends. Let's download this and use it. Let's see. Let's see what kind of effect we will encounter. The site is fast. It downloads quickly. There are also 24K in some textures, but as I said, I don't really recommend 24K for those using laptops, friends. 16K will be sufficient for us. To enhance our scene, we will continue by using a lot of ambience-giving elements in our scene. So we need to use the models I showed in the Cosmos library here, friends. These are important criteria. In the section labeled Living Room in the Salon, look, we have many materials here. We can use these materials as support without going too far down. Some of our friends do something like this. They fill the scene with as many models as there are. Instead of filling, you can balance by deleting the models you added in SketchUp and exchanging them from here. Friends, I will also show how to add them. It has a very simple system. I came here. I select my file from here, friends. I said, cut again. I dropped it here again from there. I'm also leaving it on the other one, so you can use it. I came to the dome light section. In the settings section, my dome light is marked. I come from here and selected this from here. I went back a bit more to load the HDR. It will load here by itself anyway. Let's see. 80 might have been a bit too much. I reduced this to a value like 65, friends. I press the render button. Let's see what kind of image we will encounter. I think the sun came from here, according to our other HDR. Let's see where this HDR will come from. There is too much reflection here. We need to fix them. On the marble and these parts, friends, the reflection values are a bit too high. We will change the covering on the floor. We can move on to a bit more raw concrete or wood section. This has become a cold structure. We can turn it into a warmer one, friends. Yes, look, the sun is coming from here. Actually, it gives us an effect outside the influence of our dome light. But by rotating the dome light, we can get a nicer effect, friends. Let the render continue a bit. Let's select the denoiser from here. I am activating the denoiser. Look, this is the effect that continues in this way. This effect is actually a nice effect. It gave a different toning, a different feeling. We will pull our HDR to the right to make the sun come from here. We can rotate it. We can do the rotation part from here, friends. Look, when you enter the dome light section, from the settings here, look at the texture part. It says rotate H here. Look, friends. When I set it to 90, it will rotate a bit more horizontally. Look, it rotated a bit. Let's even turn it a bit more by saying 120. In fact, let me rotate it even more by setting it to 180 so that our effect becomes a bit better. Of course, we will find these by trial and error. I pressed render test. Of course, we can also take an interactive render. For the effect to be a bit better, I am using normal render. I will also show interactive render. Friends, let's see where our light intensity is directed. By adjusting it, we can allow the light to enter from here inward. We can use plaster material on the walls here. We can use a slightly rougher material. Look, the light intensity changes a bit more. I press the stop button from here. Look, let's do something from the settings. I'm closing this. From the settings, instead of 1920 by 1008, let's make it 1280 by 720. Then let's open the interactive render from here. Friends, let's shrink it a bit like this. Let me stop this for a bit. Let's press Interactive Render here. The interactive render with the arrow on it, friends. The image will appear shortly. Yes, our image has appeared. In the interactive render, look, the image looks a bit different. I'm turning this awkward towards this side, the image of the dome light. Look, it actually gave the opposite effect. Did you see that, friends? For example, I had originally turned the arrow in the opposite direction. When I turned the arrow here, the light, that is the sun, also entered here. The background actually looks nice, friends. I liked it. Let's do it like this. Let's turn it a bit more. Let's see how it will look. Yes, having this kind of effect is ideal for us. We've set this up. I'm pressing the stop button. I went back to the settings from my settings. I say 1920 by 1000, 80 from here. These are auto. Then, starting from this initial scan, the system will proceed to render the button. You can see that it is actively attempting to render the button at this very moment. The rendering process involves several steps, including analyzing the scan data, processing the information, and finally displaying the button on the screen. Yes, it's trying to render right now, and you can observe the progress as it happens. Of course, since our scene is a bit fuller, the render starts with a slight lag, but for now, it's not bad. The initial speed. As you can see, friends, our HDR is perfectly set in the background. Our light has fallen this way. We can continue from this part and make our adjustments. We didn't use eyes lights. There are slightly dark areas here, but after using eyes lights and adjusting the television light, we will encounter a nicer image. I'm activating the denoiser. Look, do you see? We are faced with a very nice, realistic image. The textures here, friends, are ready-made textures that I brought. So, the textures on the bottle are set with the textures we previously took from the scene. The quality of the model is also set, friends. They also provide a nice ambiance. Look here, a door has remained in the shape of glass. We can change that by changing the textures. In other parts, we will make our scene stronger. That's all for this lesson. See you in the other lessons. Goodbye, with love and respect. Yes, friends, the last render we took was like this. We last saw the doom light. However, we have some minor errors in the scene here. I want to talk about them. For an effective scene, friends, the curtain is very important. It's very important to do curtain covering. While making the curtain, we will use a very fine detail here and a very simple detail. Without tiring you too much, I will show you how to make a beautiful curtain. We have ready-made coverings in the SketchUp Cosmos library. However, when using this library, we need to make a fine detail. And that detail is very simple, friends. Look now. First, we had taken such a render. Last, when we opened the lens effect denoiser, look, we had reached such a same stage, friends. In fact, what happened here? We added 2 exposures. Let's delete one of these. Look, when you reduce the highlight burning in this exposure, you can eliminate the explosion effect here by reducing it like this. Look, do you see when I reduce it thoroughly? The outdoor scene looks nicer. When I add a slight contrast like this, we encounter a nice result. Now, the thing we need to do here is this, friends. Now, how can we create a curtain texture? When we enter the Cosmos library, while creating the curtain texture, friends, look, there are transparent textures here. Look, there are textures that are see-through. We can use one of these. Look, these are already obvious. There are see-through textures. We have the opportunity to use these as sheer curtains. These are available, and so is this. We have many textures. Look, there are various types of textures here. These weren't available before. Later, they introduced them so that users could do simpler work. You can use these on sheer curtains or transparent fabrics, friends. For example, let's say, what should it be? Let's say this one. It says white sheer, for example. It says graphical. Let's click on this. Let's download it and see what comes up. It downloaded, and you press this. When you press the right arrow, it immediately adds it to the texture library. Look, this is our color. This one. Now, what we're going to do here is this. There is a type of texture we call two-sided, friends. This means double-sided material. So when we assign the material, the same texture appears on both sides. This is a feature specific to SketchUp, friends. I am pressing the plus icon here. Just don't forget the name of the texture here. Look, graphical. White. Now look, I pressed the plus icon. From the material section, look, do you see two-sided? Two-sided, it means double-sided material, friends. I entered the double-sided material. In the double-sided material, front and back material appears none. They look closed. I came here right away, friends. I am going to the G section. I select this in the G section. I selected this part. Look, I put this on the first texture, and I will put the same on the second texture as well, friends. I put the same on the second texture as well. So, since both the front and back of my material are the same, there is no problem for me anymore, friends. The only thing I will do from now on is to apply this texture onto the model, friends. Very simple. Look, well, what did I do? I created it in two-sided. I applied graphical white to the front texture. I applied the same texture to the second one as well, friends. This is the process I will do. Then I will proceed to select these curtains here and apply the texture onto the curtains using the paint bucket tool. I can transfer the texture using the paint bucket tool, or I can transfer it using the Apple tool selection part from the texture library. Look, I selected the curtain. I took the paint bucket tool. My two-sided 2 texture is active. I applied it on top, friends. I'm waiting for it to render. The texture's own pattern will appear on top of this. It should appear shortly. It might take a bit longer with complex and organic textures. Be a little patient. No matter how good your computer is, there will definitely be some lag. Look, the texture's own pattern has appeared. Don't be deceived by this texture, friends. Then I go back to this section again. I select the entire curtain by clicking 3 times. I applied it with the paint bucket tool, friends. Sometimes with these organic models, it can take a long time for the texture to appear. Friends, it's worth waiting a bit. In fact, it can also take a long time if it coincides with the saving stage. Yes, I finished it like this. I exited by pressing ESC. Let's assume we took a screenshot from the screen, friends. Let's assume we rendered from a side from somewhere. I press the render button, and this is how I will see how the curtain texture will look. Two-sided material means double-sided material. When you apply the same material to the front and back, it will give you a transparent, sheer look here, friends. You can apply this to all curtains. You can also apply a normal fabric texture, a slightly shiny fabric texture, to the curtains over there on the side. Very simple. The Cosmos library is extensive. It provides us with a lot of benefits in this regard, friends. Look, our sheer curtain has really turned out in a high-quality way. The backside is visible. The fabric layer on the sheer dirt is visible. It looks quite high quality, friends. It gives us the necessary effect, the necessary texture. Our render is currently ongoing. Look, the render path sections are continuing, friends. When you come to the start section here, look at the time part with the ellipse. We can see the duration here. Let it be 18 seconds, 30 seconds. Let's open these from the layers section here, friends. Look, I'm turning on the denoiser. Did you see? We can see that it's a very nice curtain texture, an original realistic fabric texture. In this way, Shidisima, you can make the textures higher quality beyond the standard, friends. Look, there's a glass texture here. You can change the reflections of these refraction textures. You can make it nicer. So everything is up to you. In Cosmos, in the next lesson, we will continue by changing the textures and materials from the Cosmos library. Before that, let's make a stop here, friends. Let's add our IS lights to this section here. In the next lesson, let's continue with IS lights and then proceed with the Cosmos library. That's all for this lesson. See you in the next lesson. If you apply the same texture to the other side, to the adjacent surface, to the curtain surface, you will get the same effect, friends. As you can see, we also had a curtain here. If you apply the same effect to these, you will get the same effect. It's beneficial to do those. Every nuance we add will allow our model and image to be of higher quality. Friends, because these are subtle details, but they are truly important things. Yes, friends, now we have come to use our IES lights. IES lights, friends, are actually a type of light. We can call effect light, known as overhead light. We can use these as spotlights. For example, if we use them in places where there is a spotlight, the effect that comes here will always leave a nice impression. For example, I'm entering, look, normally, since they are all components, When I select one, they all get selected. When I say add IES light to one, it will automatically suffice for all of them. This component topic is a fundamental subject of SketchUp. Those who don't know this can watch the component topic nearest on our SketchUp Turkey page, Friends. The topic of groups and components is one of the most basic commands in SketchUp. Look, it says IS light here. I took the IS light. Here it asks me for a file name. It wants an ES file. Look, it says IS file. It wants an IS file. For example, I came to F. I will add these for you as well. Let's see if we have any IES files in our archive. IS light. Yes, we have IS files. Look, I am saying IES collection here. It says best IES. Let's enter and see what's there. For example, I selected the IES number 20. I say open and added it here. Of course, I added the IES randomly, friends. Now we will see what kind of effect the IES has. Now I am going from Direct for SketchUp to Asset Editor. I came to the light section. I selected the IES light. Look, my IES light has this kind of effect. Do you see it, friends? So each IES light has a different effect. Thin, long, distribution, up and down distribution. You can see them for yourself by using these. Activate the intensity section from here. It appears to be at a value of 1700 lumens. From here you can adjust the color section as you like, friends. You have the chance to set it to either blue or yellowish tones. Look, it applied to all of them. Let's even render it to see how it looks together. It leaves a nice effect, especially at the base of the walls, friends, because the effect looks better in areas close to the wall. But it might not give an effect here. However, it still has an impact on the lighting, quite a lot. I'll press the render button. Let's get an effect. Again with the IES lights. In the next part, friends, let's change the textures. In our scene with the coatings and textures from the Cosmos library, and correct the incorrect coatings. For example, like the excessive reflection over here. Friends? And we also have a light source. I will show it to you here. In this part, how it is done. Look, at 1700 lumens, a light source is visible here. The reflection of the light source is visible. In other words, it can be set to 2000 lumens or 5000 lumens. It's beneficial to go for slightly higher lumen values to make the effect more visible, friends. Let's do it like this. Look, do you see? There is an effect here. There is an effect over here, friends. But the effect is a minor one. Let's do it like this. Look, I stopped this. Here, look, there's a part called Region Render. It renders the area we selected. Before that, to speed things up, let's set this to 5000 lumens in the settings. After 5000 lumens, let's check the options section to see what's there. We have a setting for whether shadows, reflections, and glares should be visible. I press the render button. Let's check again. How does it look, friends? We increased it a bit more. Now this part here will look different. Let's see what kind of effect we'll get. Look, the marble reflection here is different. We can replace these with the marble coating from the Cosmos library. Look, it's doing the calculation. The value has increased a bit more over there, friends. But of course, to see the effect of the value here better, it would be better if these were, how should I say, a bit more at the base of the walls, friends. But it will still have the same effect here. We don't have any issues at the moment. These have an indirect contribution to our lighting, friends. Now, our other type of light is this. Friends, look here. It's convert mesh light. Now, here's the situation, friends. Let's say we have an object here. For example, we have this cylinder object. Let me show you with the eyedropper tool on the cylinder object. The logic here is an important one. We've applied emissive light, if you notice. Where did we use emissive lights? We used emissive lights, which we call emissive, meaning any color, that is the color here, as a light source. So where did we use it? We used it in the light sources on the ceiling here. We used it in places where there are spots, as the burning effect of the spotlight. We also used it here. However, these are lights that are not included in the best physical calculation logic of Vray's calculation logic. So they are not included in indirect lighting. In other words, they are not beneficial. But you can use any light. Let's close this. Let's say any light. any material when you make it a mesh light. For example, I selected this sphere. Look, it has become active. Here now, do you see it? It is currently active. Normally, when you do not select the object, it is in a passive state. As soon as you select the object, it becomes active. Look, I want to show it again. I have now moved outside the object. It is now passive, as you can see, friends. So in this menu, it is passive. When I select the object, it becomes active. Why? To convert it into a mesh light, friends. What happens when it is a mesh light? It becomes a light source that affects our scene and calculations like a normal spotlight or rectangular light. Is it better for an object to be a mesh light, or is it better to be an IS light, and meaning an emissive light? It's better to be a mesh light, friends. I took the mesh light and selected it. Look, it became something with blue around it and dashed lines in the middle. I can go and see from the settings here in the light section under mesh light that it has an intensity of 30 degrees, and the light is like this. I can also take this and turn it into a more yellowish or a less toned object like this. When I set this to 60, this will now provide light downwards as a light source, friends. An important part. In fact, you can also do this here. Look, you can do the same thing with this material. For example, let's see. Look, I'm going in deeply, friends. I selected my eyedropper tool, selected the material. I came here, look, it says emissive light. However, instead of emissive light, make this a group. And then go here to make it a mesh light and go to the settings. Friends, look from the settings, mesh light 1. This first one is the first mesh light. This is the second mesh light. I bring this here and adjust its color to be a bit more yellowish. I set this to a value of 60. This way, this will be the light value, friends, and its reflection and calculation value will be stronger, friends. An important part for us. We can even do the picture over there. Let's say hi to the picture. I selected the control picture. Look, I said mesh light. I have selected this, friends. In fact, by going to the settings, what should we do with the intensity of this from mesh light 2? Let's make it 5. Yes. Now I came back to the 2 sections again. Let's take a render with the latest settings we made. Let's see how it looks. I'm pressing the render button and waiting, friends. Yes, while our render is ongoing, we actually saw that the mesh light here is very dark.
Subscribe to my channel.
We made the picture
and
here,
also press this bell icon.
but it turned into a state where the picture's feature was lost. We will adjust it again. Let's convert it to emissive light, friends. We see the light effect here. It didn't affect much, but since it's between 2 panels, the current value is sufficient for us. Let's turn on the denoiser. As you can see, we are faced with a clean effect like this. Actually, the toning of the light is very good, friends. But the light effects here are a bit tiring for our eyes. When we apply the lens effect, look, we can lighten its color a bit more. We can increase the light intensity a bit more. The light intensity was a bit low. Now, I'm stopping this. I'll be back again. I need to delete the mesh light in this setting, friends. Let's say Control-Z. Look, you can delete this. I'm saying Control-Z again. I deleted this. Let's say hi to this and see which. Yes, I've selected this image. I'm switching to this setting image. From emissive light, look, it says Vray MTL. I'm copying this, friends. I press the plus sign. I'm saying emissive light. After emissive light comes this into its own slot. I am pasting this by saying paste. Let's see. Actually, the entire image should be visible here. Let's try copy again and say paste. Copy from here. Yes, this didn't appear, but we will need to add the image to this again. It can't find the thing. It's like that because it can't find the image file, friends. Let's see where the image file for this is. Escape. It should be in the training set section. Let's go to the Y section. I mean, it got stuck a bit now, but a different image format can also be uploaded. Let's see. Let's say Y. Was the training set here? No, it wasn't here. Let's do something. we can upload any image file there. So this could be it. Let's set the intensity value to 5, like this. In fact, let it be 5. Yes, let it be 5. In fact, let's say its image is like this, texture position. Let's call this again fixed pins. Let's check the pins here. The pins actually need to be here. Later, when you remove the pins like this and place them here, they will fit perfectly in the image format, friends. It's as if there's a movie like a Star Wars movie. Let it stay at an intensity of 5. Let's also change the emissive, our light here. This light here, friends, what was that light? Mesh light was 2. Sorry, mesh light wasn't 2. Let's delete this. This was mesh light 1. I'm adjusting the light intensity, like this. I'm going to set this to 150. Let it give a bit more light here. Let's take another render like this, friends. Let's see how it looks. By the way, this work and the Star Wars project are also mine. I made it in twin motion, friends. It looks like a movie, but I depicted it as a confrontation between a spaceship and 2 characters in terms of the story. That was also liked on the twin motion page. Let's see what kind of image we will encounter, friends. Look. The light coming from the TV on the screen also affected our scene. The scene changed suddenly. We are facing a somewhat different scene. I wondered for a moment if the IES lights were disabled. When we turn on the denoiser from here, look, it's like this. I wondered if the rectangle lights were disabled because there was a bit of a problem with the lighting of the scene. Let's say stop like this. Let's see. Yes, these are still on. Rectangle, lights are at 60, IS lights, mesh lights. Sometimes these irregularities can happen in Vray. Let's reduce the texture. We will use in this scene a bit. I mean, this is a bit too much. Let's make the TV image. Not 5, but 2. Let's face a slightly lower image. Let's do it like this. We got an image like this in the end. Let's check our settings. I wonder if our settings have been reset because we got a more faded image. These are auto. Yes, these are selected. In fact, let's do it like this, friends. Let's say revert to this. Let's reset the settings again. Because the settings are in our hands, we can change them as we wish. I said medium, plus. Set this to auto exposure, auto white balance. I changed this to 1920, 1920, 1980. I also turned on the denoiser from here. And the next step I did was go to CUDA. By selecting these from here, I marked CUDA. CUDA is marked. Yes, this is the process, friends. Let's press the render button. Let's see what kind of image we will encounter. Because after doing the last step, my scene had become a bit dark. I wondered if the effect in the HDRI had decreased, but we will look at the scene again now. Yes, the scene has come back to itself a bit now, friends. I think there was a problem with the settings. I reset it again and brought it back to its original state. I had slightly reduced the emissive value here. It seemed like when the value here increased, the surrounding value decreased. Let's turn on the denoiser from here. Yes. When we turn on the last effect, we are faced with this kind of impact. In our next lesson, friends, we will use textures and coatings in a more varied way. We can increase the value of the emissive lights here, that is, the IES lights. I think we set it to 2,500. We set it to 5,000. By increasing the values in the 10,000s, we can further enhance the activity. We will add objects and actions to enhance the ambiance in these parts, friends. That's all for this lesson. See you in our next lesson. Yes, friends, it's time to use the Cosmos library. Actually, one of the most enjoyable parts is using the Cosmos library, friends, because it's a place where there are ready-made modules and ready-made textures. Later on, I will also show in detail how to use the textures we get from outside in a few sections, friends. But Cosmos speeds up our work a bit more. Look, for example, let's say we want to use a wooden texture on the floor. I want it to have a slightly warmer appearance, for instance. You just need to download and press this button. The downloaded parts are already specified. Look, in the downloaded parts, friends, there is a right-pointing arrow sign. For those not downloaded, you can download them by pressing the download button, your texture. Let's see, for example, from this floor section, the texture you want to use could be this one. Let it download. Then we can use it. You can download and use the texture you want from here to create different effects. You can also use a texture like this. It's a bit up to you, friends. Using textures, of course, you need to try many textures to see what kind of effect they will have on the scene. I transferred it. I came from here, friends. It's active here. Look. Now let's do it. Like this, let's select it. I selected the ground. I transferred it here by saying apply to selection, friends. Look, let me activate the eyedropper and see how its size looks. It doesn't look bad, but if you think it's small, from texture position, not fixed pin, hold this part like this, and by enlarging this part, you can make the texture a bit bigger. Since the settings have completely applied themselves here, you will get the full effect here, friends. Let's use marble coating for the backside as well. Look, come here. Let's type Marvel and press Enter. Let's see what's available. What can we use there? Ours is in light tones. For example, this one could work. It could be in black tones or light tones. You know, to make it more visually appealing, I'm choosing this white tone. Look, at this mark, I'm here. I selected this surface from here, friends. I said Apple to selection from here. I transferred it here. Look what happened. The coating fit here perfectly, or not quite. So you immediately go to the helper tools. You press this. Look, it fit perfectly just like that. You press this, it became smaller. You press this, it made it fit a bit more precisely. And if you want to enlarge it even more, you say texture position. You enlarge it like this and release it, as you can see, friends. In fact, let's do this. Let's turn around. There were coatings here. Look, the same coating is here. We can do it like this, like this. You take this with the eyedropper tool and you turn with the warp symbol like this. Then when you select these, this is one piece. This is another piece. Then you continue by selecting these, again like this. You can continue to change the coatings as you wish, in the style you want, like this. There was an excess of reflection on these. Let's take a look at that, friends. I'm selecting this one. Look, the reflection is too much. Let's significantly reduce the reflection color glossiness like this. Look, I'm slightly increasing it. Values of 070, 080 are good. Let's take a look at these. Check the reflection and glossiness value on this one. In the reflection value over here, these look very low as well. Let's do it like this. Sorry, let me select this one. Yes, these have texture. Look, it appears as texture here. These are reflections. When we do it this way, we are faced with a nice image. You can change the background texture here. On the TV screen, look, we have a hidden light. At the back, friends, you can draw a rectangle on it and assign a color or light to it. Let's do it like this. Look, I'm selecting this. I selected the mesh light. I said convert mesh light. I came to the settings. In the light settings, this value is for mesh light too. What should we do with this? Let's make its color blue, friends. Let it be bluish. I changed it. 2 or 3. Let's say in shades of blue. Let's go back like this. Let's take a render from our render settings. Let's see how it looks. Well, the ambiance changed a bit because we changed the floor, and these parts changed. I didn't really like this texture, but it could be a bit darker. Let's see what kind of image we will encounter. We have turned the shiny image here into a more gloss, that is, a semi-matte image, friends. The light behind the TV is showing itself, friends. It seems like the value is a bit too much. The wooden parquet on the floor doesn't seem to fit here very well because the colors look a bit different. We can choose a darker, more concrete-like color for this area, friends. Of course, the part about design elements is also very important here. Now, the wood veneer we used here created a completely awkward situation with this area. Continuing in accordance with these is related to completing your realism and aesthetic aspects. So it makes more sense to continue by doing those, friends. For example, let's come from here. Let's go to the concrete part, which we call concrete. That has its own style here, friends. Let's take a look like this. Let's find a more straightforward structure from the brick concrete part to make it colder, because the design has its own coldness. Since it's a cold design, look, it says flooring. Using such a coating would be more logical for us. Yes, it downloaded. Let's come, friends. I'm selecting this surface. Sometimes there can be such lags and freezes. It's like this because it's at the recording stage. I selected this. Apply to selection again. Look, my file has arrived. The coating has arrived here, friends. The ratio is not bad. The ratio looks good. The ratio and proportion part. In fact, we can also use black in the background here. Black looks nice too. It is pleasing to the eye, friends. This part, I will make this part black as well to make it a bit different. Let's come here. I think there should be a marble stone part. Actually, there are different things too. We can use them as well. For example, look, we can use this there as black in a different way. White. In fact, we can change their colors. It could be stone, but stone wouldn't fit here. I will use black. Let me mark this. Yes. Let's do it like this. Let's take a look at the last render we took for an effect. There is a bit of a problem with the reflection of these, friends. These need to be a bit more reflective. I mean, it shouldn't be like this normally. Look, it appears on my head here, but this is my color, this is the coating. When I say clear, it should normally look like this. Yes, it should look like this. And its reflection should be abundant. Why is it like this? Let's see. There's something here. Let's turn off this bump part. The image part, let's turn this off. It seems like there's a missing part in the settings here. Without touching that, let's take this texture and make a duplicate of it. It seems like there's an error here. This should have a lot of reflection like this, guys. I mean, right now, yes, it should have a reflection like this. Yes, when we say georeference like this, yes, now it's fixed. A reflection like this will work for us, guys. Yes. Let's look at the outer part of the frame on the TV screen. These appear to be plastic. I said edit frame. Look. Yes, it looks like this. Let the milk carton's reflection be a bit more as well. Yes, man, let's look here. Like this. The same coating is also available for this part. Yes. There are these models. Look. Samsung speakers. Let's see how they look on them. Yes, these also look like this, guys. We can use the same marble on top of this as well. Yes, I'm marking the closure from here. Look, it fits perfectly, do you see? When I press this, it fits right on top, friends. Yes, let's look again from here. This time, I will keep it in render a bit longer, so you can see the quality more clearly, friends. Because in Vray render, the length of the render time determines our quality, friends. Because the more light enters inside, the more efficient it will be. Look, there's a transparent view on this door here. Actually, we have a door here, but this door opens to the balcony. But it shouldn't be. Glass like this. So let's select this one. Let's see. The opacity is visible as a percentage here. Yes. Look, there's an issue with the settings here, friends. Some situations have arisen here. Let's close this. Normally, this is the color. Let's add some brightness. Do it from the reflection section. Let it stay like this in the glossiness section. Let it stay this way, friends. Let's look at the door handle. Let's call the metallic part reflection IOR. Let's increase this as well so that the door handle remains metallic. So let it stay like this. And let the color be a bit darker. Yes, let it be something metallic like this, a chrome appearance, friends. We were going to increase the IES lights here. Let's look at the IES lights. The IES lights are at 5,000 lumens. I'm making this 8,000 lumens, friends. Let's see. I'm going to take a render like this. I will keep the render long. Let's meet after the render. I'm pausing this lesson. I will stop it. I will flash it. Let the render continue a bit. After that render, let's look at the quality again, friends. I will take at least a 5 to 10 minute render. I'm pressing the render button, friends. Let this continue. See you again at the end of the render. Yes, friends, let's look from this stat section. We are faced with such an image in a 3-minute render process. It's a very clear image, friends. However, there are parts here that bother me, friends. The texture here, this texture, appears as a flat surface. We will apply textures to these. The texture here, friends, we will apply these. The HDR outside is giving a bit too much light. Let's see how much light it is sending. Let's check that, friends. Let's go from here. From the dome light section. Look, the HDR shows 65. Let's reduce this to 55. This means giving a little less light, allowing less light to enter inside, and preventing overexposure. I set it to 55, friends. I close this. We can redirect the light intensity to slightly different directions and change its direction. A bit more this way or even that way. Look, a nice image has formed here. The light behind the TV image at the back has created a unique ambience on the marble here, almost like an electric effect. But the coverings here need to be changed, friends. The sofa coverings need to be changed. We can change them to leather or different coverings from the Cosmos library. That's all for this lesson. In the next lesson, I will change these coverings. I don't want to waste too much time on that, because these are things I've shown. You can do it too. You have the ability to change all the textures here with coverings from the Cosmos library. You can also assign curtain coverings for the curtains. For example, let's come here and I'll show an example. For instance, type curtain in English here and press enter. Look, do you see there are different coverings available here? You can download and use them here. You can use them either with patterns or without. Look, there are patterns here. This one here might be more suitable for us. Let's download and transfer this one. It came like this. Then look, from here. This is a slightly more classic type of covering. Of course, as I say in every lesson, organic covering takes a bit longer. I say apply to selection. It will transfer this onto it. As I said, if the covering doesn't fit, you can use either this or these two friends. In circular parts, you need to use this. Whichever you use, whichever fits best on the model, is the most ideal, friends. Look at the texture of the covering. If that texture fits, and the model appears smooth, and the surfaces look even, then there's no problem, friends. Look, there's also a model here. You can use this model, too, but it comes as a model, of course. Let's wait a bit longer and see what kind of result will emerge. Accordingly, we can change these with the covering part over there. You can change the others in the same way. There are types of coverings in the Cosmos library. There are sites that offer free coverings. You can download the textures from there and use them in the same way. Of course, since all the settings in Cosmos are applied, it's more logical to use and change these. Of course, since it's a bit organic, the process takes a little longer, friends. Yes, using the texture took a bit long, friends. I'm pressing this part here. Let's see how it will fit the texture. V-Ray has this kind of issue. With organic models, friends, normally, you can assign textures more quickly in Twinmotion, D5, and Escape. That is, in Twinmotion and Escape. But in SketchUp Vray, you need to wait a bit in these parts. Friends, when the texture doesn't fit perfectly, you need to use V-Ray helper tools to adjust this spool UV map part. For that, you also need to wait a bit, friends. Therefore, by pressing this part here, you will need to wait a bit for the texture to fit perfectly onto the model. Yes, it has adopted a fitting style, like this. But we can see this regarding the texture after taking the render. Let's look at the continuation of the processes after taking the render, friends. As I said, the process takes a bit long. Therefore, I will skip these parts a bit, because with organic textures, you need to wait a bit. That means a big time loss for us. For now, let this process continue in this way. We can continue by changing the other textures, friends. As I mentioned, we can't fully see the texture of this chair that bothers us here, friends. Let's take a look at it if you want. Look, here it's normally a rough texture, but what appears here is a smooth texture. Therefore, we need to replace it. Go with the leather texture from Cosmos' own library. I can't find some textures. We can find the closest texture color from this leather texture section, or we can find a color ourselves, friends. That's up to us. Look, a color like this would go better there. Or I would say, should we use black? But this color might be ideal for us. I came to the settings section. Look, this color, this texture. Let's make an example. For instance, I came from here. All are selected. I say, apply to selection from here for my texture. Look, if it fits on top here, we won't need to apply the overlay, texture identity, but let's see what kind of image we will encounter. I will do one of these. You can do the others yourself, because as you can see, friends, it takes a very long time. Yes, look, it turned out like this. By pressing this part, I can ensure the texture fits perfectly on the surface. Let's see what kind of image we will encounter. Let's wait a little longer. I mean, just like every task has its challenges, V-Ray can also have such difficulties, friends. So there are issues with textures here as well. Look, it fits perfectly, as you can see. It made a longitudinal fit here, but still, it has a nice fitting shape. There is something with the textures here. Look, there seems to be an error on the side parts. We can handle it like this. Let's press this and see what kind of image it will create. After that, if we use this, it might make a fit. There is a wrong part in the textures, horizontally though. Yes, right now, it's like this, and when we press this, I think it will fit completely in these parts. In this lesson, it has been a long session exceeding 18 minutes. Friends, let me go back like this. I'm going to do something like this, friends. I've selected it again. I'm pressing this. After pressing this, I will activate the coating and enlarge it with this ratio. Because when I selected this texture in this coating, the fit was nicer. It was more efficient, friends. When I pressed this part, the fit was more efficient. That's why I'm going to use a technique like this here. Look, the ratio in this part is similar to the ratio in this part. I activated this with the dropper. I came to this. Look, it shows 30. I made this 100, friends. Sorry, it was 1,000. Let's make it 100. Did you see the value here? And the value here actually became the same. Let's make it 80 so that it stays like this. Now it fits perfectly. So instead of using this texture here, I used this tool instead of that tool. Because I used this tool, the texture fit perfectly on top of it. Look, we have created a nice seamless texture. We will continue by applying all of these here, friends. I will do it not outside of the lesson so that it doesn't take up too much of our time. We will change this with a carpet covering that matches here, friends. By continuing in this way, we will make our visual more high quality. That's all for this lesson. See you in our other lessons. Goodbye. With love and respect. Hello, friends. In this lesson, I want to talk about a really important topic.
Subscribe to my
Color
channel
compatibility.
and also
Since
press this
textures also
bell
have a
icon.
color deficiency, the color compatibility of models or any accessories you bring from outside needs to harmonize within the work. When you bring in a material from outside, a model, that material is actually an external material, meaning it belongs to an outside design. So you need to change that color according to your design's color. But if you are going to create a color design from scratch, if you are going to work on color compatibility, I want to show you a very nice website. It will make your work very easy, friends. Look, we have a site like this. The address is coolers.to, friends. Here, once you enter the site, just press the space bar on your keyboard and it gives you compatible colors. Friends, whether you use these colors on the wall, on the carpet, or in furnishings, by using the dominance of these colors in your work, you can achieve beautiful results. Not just with colors, but if you also make the furnishings compatible with these colors, you will continue very excellently, friends. Look, there are many things here, features. In fact, when you click on view, when it gives you the RGB codes and hex codes here, it's enough to click on each color. When you make your scene compatible with these colors, friends, you can achieve very excellent results. You need to adjust the dominance of the colors by using some on the ceiling, some on the floor, and some on the walls. By combining contrasting colors, harmonious colors, and soft colors in this way, you can achieve very beautiful results in design. So you can extract colors from many shades in this scene, friends. That's what I mean. And you also need to make the textures you use and the models you have brought ready compatible with those colors here. But if the models you have taken from here and there do not match the color harmony and tone harmony in your scene, they will create an awkward appearance and will show themselves in the render. When we go back to the beginning, just as we talk about the quality of design and modeling, color harmony is really important here as well. I wanted to mention this in this lesson while it came to my mind, friends. That's all for this lesson. See you in our other lessons. Hello, friends. In this lesson, I want to show you another lesson on using external textures. The more we practice them, the more important it becomes for us to use textures correctly. I used a texture called plaster from our site textured.com. It's a slightly rough texture, friends. You can use it on ceilings and walls. I will use this on the ceiling. I showed it before. If you remember, you assign the part labeled base color, which is the part with the color box, the part labeled high in displacement. I want to say something about the displacement part. In Vray, friends, try to avoid using displacement because rendering takes a very, very long time. There's no need for displacement. The normal map will do the job for us in every way. When we assign the roughness to the glossiness map, the process is complete. So we will handle our work with 3 textures. There's no need to turn the textures into a mess by going into too much detail, friends. Now look, I want to use it here. I took the eyedropper from the texture section, from the material section. I activated the gloss part. Look, the plaster is already 0 here. I went to edit Vray. I said, friends, look, this is how it appears. Now I can create a new texture or reset this texture. How do I reset it? Normally, friends, I'm going to say something like this. If the checkered flag is lit like this where it says color, it means there is a texture inside. You can right-click and select clear to delete this texture. Look, it has become dim. I'm coming to the reflection part. Look, here too, there is the same checkered flag. I say clear. I close this. Look, the same thing is in the bump section as well, because whichever render engine was used before, its settings will appear And incorrect settings can affect us incorrectly, friends. That's why we want to bring the color part into the coating we desire. I clicked on this checkered flag. What did I say before clicking on the checkered flag? If you use triplanar, regardless of the surface, whether it's a curtain, a different inclined surface, or a flat surface, the coating will fit without causing issues. I selected triplanar. I came to the Texture X section. I came to the checkered flag here. From the bitmap section, I went to the gray salon part. I selected the base color. From the plaster section, I clicked open, friends. Look, it came here. I came back again. And the size section here shows 10, friends. Normally in UV maps, these values didn't appear low. I will start this from 50, friends. Look, at 50, I was able to see the jagged parts on the screen. I went back and came to this section. Now I will show you how to do it in a practical way. Before doing all the settings, repeatedly, say copy for the upper part, and paste it into the lower part, which is the roughness section. So, say paste in copy here. Don't say instance. If you say instance, it will make the settings exactly the same. I'm copying, friends. Look, I selected the normal map here. I said paste copy here as well. Now, the process I will do is changing the channels. I clicked, came and clicked here. I clicked here. What should it be here? It should be roughness. I said open. I came back. Look, the roughness appeared. I didn't change it again because the settings were at 50. It appeared instantly. I will do the same thing in the normal map section. However, by lowering the value here, values like 020, 030 will work for me. I'm clicking here. I selected my normal map. I said open. I came back again. And as you can see, I created a textured surface like this. Friends, now let's render to see how the surface looks. This surface is a plated surface that I use, friends. Let's press the render button again. Let's see what kind of result we will encounter. You don't need to tire yourself by going into too much detail and intricacy. In the settings and texture settings, you can create very effective textures with very simple settings. Here, a slight roughness effect, which we call the bump effect or normal map, and a slight reflection effect will always do the job for us, friends. Look. We can see that roughness better over there. It looks more effective in the places where the light falls, friends. I want the render to pass a bit. So, what we call render passes this. In rendering, the processor and graphics card perform an operation with each pass, that is, with each light transmission, friends. We actually call that process a pass, and each time it performs an operation, it corrects this area. How should I put it? By casting light here and performing an operation, it tries to create rougher or smoother surfaces. Look, while we couldn't see the screen at first, now we can see it more clearly. This is how it operates, friends. That's why it's beneficial to apply a certain number of passes. The more passes it applies, the higher the render quality becomes. For example, let's say 3000 is sufficient. Look, friends, do you see how vibrant the texture we are facing is? It's the same here. If you want to reduce these textures, if you want them to be even smaller, friends, I say stop. You know the part we set to 50, just changing that part is enough. So you come here, change this for all of them. For example, I set it to 40. I reduced it a bit more with this, then went back. I set this one to 40 as well. If you leave it at 50, and if these values remain in the others, the UV maps or coordinates will not match each other. Since your glossiness and normal map do not match, there will be errors in the textures, guys. Look, in this way, we have resolved this part. If you want to apply that texture here, again, you can give the same thing here as well. It has already remained here as a texture platter. In the other parts, guys, I will add accessories to these sections from the Cosmos library. Adding accessories is simple. In our next lesson, I will show them to you guys. It's quite an enjoyable part. It's a system where we continue by adding accessories, adjusting the color texture and the coating texture. If you want, you can change the carpet texture here. Since I will be giving you the working file, you can make any changes you want within the working file, guys. That's all for this lesson. See you in our other lessons. Hello, friends. In this lesson, we will see how to download a model from the Cosmos library. The Cosmos library appears in this menu when you press the color palette icon in the second menu, friends. It shows that there are more than 3,000 models, over 100,000 textures, and more than 100 HDRs.
There are also 4 collections, friends. At the bottom, you can go to the relevant sections and download models related to them. Look, when I download a tablet model, it appears white. Or when I download a model here, it appears white. These accessories are white, and the cat here appears white, as you can see. Why does it appear white? This means proxy, friends. Proxies. Do not lag in the scene. If you want, you can replace your models here with the models here. No matter how many models you used in Vray, it doesn't mean much anymore, because when you use Vray's Cosmos library, the models are proxies, so the scene will not lag. You can take them quite randomly. So, you can change the models you have used here. When you enter the living room section, you have the chance to add models related to your work. Here, friends, I have enough models, but whether it's a carpet, other models, or accessories. Look, there is a pillow group here. You can change these according to your own work. There are book models, for example. We can add this here. Let's add it. When you download them, when downloaded, something like this happens, friends. The moment you download it, look, you press this, and it directly comes to the tip of your mouse, friends. When it comes to the tip of the mouse, let's look at this. Let's check the direction of the books, friends. Look, this is the spine part. You take this, rotate it from here with the move button, and place it here. Then it's enough to place it from this end to here. If it appears too large, press the K key with the scale button. Press the K key to see the backside like this. Take this and place it here. When you place the top part here, as you can see, it will fit perfectly here, friends. In fact, to make it look a bit more natural, let's leave some space on the sides and top. Let it be like this. When we press the K key again, as you can see, the books will have settled there. It has gone inward here. Let's pull this a bit as well. As you can see, it's a process like this. So you can use all the models in the entire Cosmos library like this. Look, there are different lamps here. For example, I like this lamp. We can actually use that lamp here as well. Of course, our scene is full, but we can use a plant here if you want. So there are many features. Whether it's pots or different models, there are many models. In fact, new ones have arrived. Many models have arrived recently, friends. You can use them to create more effective visuals. There could also be a lamp in this corner. Actually, for a different touch, it could also be a plant. Let's see what there is. I don't want to waste too much time on these. Because there are so many models, friends, you have the opportunity to use them yourself. Press the color palette icon over there and check again what's available and what's not. Let's see. When you say all models, these come up. Let's look at the collections. Look, there are models related to plants here as well. I think the pots should be here. There are also tools and outdoor plants here. Yes, it's not here. I think we'll need to make a selection from the living room section. Again, there are so many models, and it doesn't lag much. Actually, they all appear at once, friends. Look, you have the chance to change and use these models here. Look, you can change the blanket model we used over there and use different models. So there are many models, as you can see, friends. So we can actually change this model here by deleting this. At least we can reduce the polygon count and achieve a more effective work, friends. The models of Vray are quite high quality. I leave the decorations of the other parts to you. I will model and add in this way myself, friends. By taking from here, you can also make additions and decorations according to your preference. That's it for this lesson. See you in the next lessons.
Hello, friends. In this part, we will modify our design by incorporating the effects of artificial intelligence a bit more into our work, friends. Actually, while changing the design, we can revise the model by converting the alternatives provided by artificial intelligence into an image that we like the most, or that the customer desires, along with the variable in our modeling of the changed design. I will show this. This is an important part, friends. I am using the site styler.ai. I selected the interior design section. I will show how it's done shortly, but I will show what kind of alternatives it has given us. In the free versions, since the resolution is low, don't focus too much on the resolution.
But with the versions it has given us, we can change our design in this way. Look, it has given me four alternatives. In layer 5, it has provided such an alternative. It says you can use the colors here in this way. You can use the wood like this. You can use LED lights here. Look, friends, a different alternative solution. Here, the wood, here, the marble, and the color harmony is magnificent. Let's look at layer 4, friends. I closed the 5th one. Look, it has used a slightly more modern atmosphere here. It has used wood again. By covering the glass at the back, it has created a different effect. It has moved the glass part to the left. In our design, there is no such part, but it's still not bad. Let's move on to layer 3, friends. Look, by using marble here, by using marble on the floor, it has tried to create different effects. I had initially told you this about color information. Not everyone may have knowledge of colors, but just with artificial intelligence, we can use the color texture and coating texture here, friends. I am also considering doing a similar work. So, I will try to bring the work here to this color using the coatings I downloaded from Cosmos. Friends, let's close layer 3 and look at layer 2. Let's close it. Layer 2. Did you see? Here. It has gone for a more modern look. Again, it used marble on the floor, used marble here, used marble slabs here. This part is not very recognizable, but for us, this layer 3 looks better, friends. I think if we revise according to the color design here, we will achieve a better result. Look, it used a slightly darker marble, granite on the floor. By using different granites here, it created a nicer ambience. Even the accessories used are done in this way. Let's see how it's done, friends. Now, let's first return to the main page, friends. Styler.ai. In the design I made now, it will give a slightly different result, friends. If we like something there, we can do that too. Look, the save part is here. I logged into the site with my Gmail address. I click on New Project. After New Project, look, there's Import Image here. In Import Image, I'm uploading the 1080p render I have. Oh, sorry, this one is 4K. This is the 1080p one. I'm uploading this. The purpose of uploading this is just to show the AI an example visual. So I have an example like this. It's like telling it to replicate from here, guys. Look, the work has appeared, but in the work, this checkered flag part becomes the canvas size. To adjust the canvas size, you go to the top section. You select 16 by 9. When you click Apply, it fits perfectly, guys. Look, there's image to image here. Look at, it says there's no style here. It says no style. You scroll down, guys. Look, there's a realistic section. If you select realistic, it makes changes according to the design again. But there's something like this. This realistic is actually a general realistic section. When you scroll down, guys, look, there's pixel art here. Now, there's an art in section there. As you scroll down, guys, look, up here, in the architectural section, there's classic, fantasy, and further down, look, bohemian. Here it continues with interior design in wood tones, modern, Scandinavian. It continues with minimalist industrial. Look, guys, cream tones as modern. I tried this in a bedroom. Hotel, look, it perceives it as a modern hotel, as interior design. When you click on this, it does something different. Here, as industrial, minimalist, it changes the designs. Guys, let's choose Scandinavian if you want. In fact, look, when you mark the auto prompt section, it writes a prompt here. It writes the prompt automatically. So it recognizes the scene, guys. Look, I will show you in a moment. Look, I took this. I turned it like this, right-clicked. I said translate to Turkish. Look, the living room is filled with furniture, including a sofa and 2 chairs. A flat-screen TV is mounted on the wall above the sofa. So, it is mounted here. And there are several books scattered around the room. Actually, it's not like that, but there are books. 2 people are seen in the room, one on the left side of the scene, and the other closer to the right side. Actually, one person is visible. People have recognized this as well. The living area also includes some decorative elements, like a potted plant and a vase. But if you want, you can change this and write it yourself. For example, let's open Translate Friends, or we can open DeepL. For instance, I selected Turkish from here. Let's say modern, minimal design. A minimal living room design. Opposite is a TV unit. There is a modern TV Unity opposite. A color palette consisting of very soft and soft colors is present and calming. Let's say this living room, because we need to specify. Description is actually very important, friends. In description, you need to know what and how you should do. So when describing it, you actually need to explain this from the outside, starting from the shell, a modern minimal living room design of the camera. From behind the camera and the left wall. Plenty of sunlight is coming in. Plenty of sunlight is coming in. On the right side, there is an entrance door. An entrance door is present. It is something like this. I said, copy this. I come here, Control, and we'll change this design to a Scandinavian style and offer us 5 options. Friends, you press the button here and wait by saying loading friends. A certain amount of time passes. Look, it started creating here. It continues as 15%, 18%. The nice part about this, friends, is that we can change the design with the examples it gives us. When we reach a certain stage in design, we can easily convert our own work into those design examples and color, font tones. Friends, this is a very important topic. That's why I wanted to emphasize this specifically, because we are slowly approaching the end of the lessons. In this part, you can create impressive visuals using these. Okay, we set the render settings. Enclosure settings in Vray Render, but look, what has it done for us here? I select 1, 2, 3, 4. I say place on canvas. Look, this is the first image. It has made a very stylish TV unit in the background. Of course, it has mixed up some parts. Look, it couldn't solve it, friends. It has made the entrance door on the left side. I close to layer 5. Layer 4. Look, here it has gone for slightly more whitish, soft colors. What I call soft colors, but again, it couldn't fully generate it in sketch form. At the top, there are a lot of white tones in these white Scandinavian colors. Off-white, normal white on the floor. It has gone for a normal shaggy carpet and has done something in white tones. It has made the LEDs white, as you can see. Here, the TV mount. The TV wall is tilted inward quite a bit, friends. It has done something different where the mirror is located. A process like this. We can also do this. I'm returning to the main page again. I say new project, friends. I said import image. I selected this, again, the 180p image. In the image to image section, there is a realistic part, friends. Let's select that. There, it proceeds without specifying a type in the interior. So we won't specify a type. Look, I came here. I selected 16 by 9, friends. From the image to image section, we will only select the realistic part. These sometimes vary. Sometimes they move up, sometimes down. Look, I selected this realistic part. I said paste from here. I pasted the same prompt, the prompt I wrote here, friends. I say it again, and now it starts creating. Of course, there's something like this. Why is the resolution low? The resolution is low for this one. Since we are using the free version, look, we have a credit here. That credit is being used and it renews every day. But of course, it provides a low resolution. I mean, it provides a very low resolution, but since we can see the color tones, it's not a problem for us. It's not a problem because we can see the design. We can change the design as we like. Look, you say 1, 2, 3, and 4, place on canvas. It has arrived. Look, friends, it has made a wooden coffee table. Here, these parts are made of wood in white tones, and the floor is also made of wood. Do you see it has made a fireplace here, friends? It has made a fireplace by changing the bookshelf here. I'm closing layer 5. It has actually made a nicer design on layer 4. As you can see, it has let a bit more sunlight in. On layer 3, it's simpler, more minimal. Actually, we had said minimal, if you remember. It has brought the work into a more minimal style. As you can see, the color tones are quite harmonious and beautiful. And it's like this on 3. Look, it has recognized the people here. We can also do something like this in wood tones. This is also possible, friends. As you can see, there are no limits in design. This is the design we made. But we can convert the design into this and get more beautiful renders, more toned renders. We can transform the color tones. We will render in the design into different parts, friends. In fact, you can also do it like this. When you arrive, go to the new project section. Select the new image from the import image section. Selecting the image here is actually about providing an example here, friends. Because when you give an example, it creates a duplication for you. I chose 16 by 9. Look at the image section down here. This could also be possible, friends. Interior design. Look, it just says interior design inside. We can choose this too. Let's choose this. And not say auto prompt. Did we say minimal? Yes. We said minimal living room. Minimal doesn't actually fit into our minimal. Let's say a modern living room design. Let's not mix up minimal. Yes, let's say it like this, friends. I deleted the minimal part. I'm saying Control V. I wanted it to be recreated from here. Let's see what it will produce in this part. As I said, we can use these parts. I will take one of these and change the color tones based on these color tones, friends. In fact, if they want wood in the background, I can change these parts to wood. If you noticed, in the first one, there were nice marble tones when I first did it. It had made granite. I liked that tone. We can make a change in those tones, friends. Let's see what kind of variability it will create here. Sometimes this part is on hold. It keeps you waiting. It tells you to wait during the loading phase, because sometimes when the site is busy, it gets very crowded. You might have to wait a bit in that part. Look at what has been created. It mixed these up a bit, but look, it mixed them up a lot. It couldn't create it exactly, friends, but still, it's somewhat clear what has been done. But it has turned the work into a bit of a mess. Friends, the best is the work we did at the very beginning, friends. We can apply that work there, different kind of work. Look here, it has covered the marble columns with marble. It covered them in a slightly different tone of the same marble. This could be a working system, friends. We can match the colors here to there as much as the tones allow. So, for example, how can we do it? Let me show you an example. For instance, what kind of flooring? Now you come to Cosmos. We look at Cosmos. Let's write marble. We can find a coating close to that coating. For example, we can use these pages here, friends. We can use it here. He has already done the same. Well, look, we can use a similar coating here. On the floor, we can use one of the coatings from our texture fund. That could be a way to proceed. We accidentally opened the canvas. Yes, look, we can also use these here, friends. Let's do it this way. Actually, we should get a new file, but I won't bother with that now. Well, I selected this, and I will transfer it here. What is the name of this? Marble. Let's press M. Marble, page.
Hey there.
Yes, this one.
Subscribe to my
This
channel
coating.
and
I
also
selected
press
it,
this bell
and I'm
icon.
saying selection with a shortcut. I transferred it here. Look, the coatings are quite nice. Then I took this and moved it here. I selected this part. I moved this here, friends. In this way, I completed this part. I will do the other parts in the same way, friends. As I said, I will proceed by completing it step by step. In fact, look at the ground here. We can find the same texture on Texture Fund. Because the stone coatings on Texture Fund are really nice, friends. It's beneficial to download the coatings from there. I will show it shortly. Let's go to the stone section. Let's see which one is available. For example, this one could be, look, this one could be, this one could be, that one could be. Close to it. We can use one of these from here. Let's see which ones could work. There are quite a few. We can choose one of these, friends. There are nice coatings. We will use one of them. If not, we will make it resemble. As I said, this will be a process where we continue by doing these, friends. When you take the dropper from here and select it, a different texture will be created here, resulting in a nice outcome. I am completely changing the style. I showed how the style should change here and how to proceed with the revision, friends. Look, in this way, and by making these variations on the ground here, we can use them. In fact, we can use different colors belonging to the same color tones by using different colors on different slats here. For example, let's say it could be like this, friends. For instance, I duplicated these from this coating. Then I went to the edit section. Look, now, normally when you go to the edit section and remove the coating, the color of the coating will remain, friends. You can assign the color of this coating here in this way. For example, if you want it to be the same as that color tone, it can be created like this. Or we can make it darker if you want, friends. Or if you want to take the color of the marble texture on the floor, for instance, let's say we want to use this color texture there. We want to use this texture there. First, you came here. Look, there is a match color option. Match color means to take this color. Look, it took the color here. It will be a more harmonious color, friends. When I come here, it's a process like this. We can also change the parts here. For example, we will use the same colors here. In this way, we will continue by changing the color tones given by artificial intelligence, or the color tones we want ourselves, friends. I think it will be nicer. We both make a change and see how to make the change in this way, friends. Let's take a look. It's a process like this. Let's even take another look at how he did it. Look, friends, think of a slightly lighter color here. He used a slightly lighter one. Here. Actually, of course, he closed the column covering a bit differently here. We have the cheetah version, but we will continue by changing it. Look, he used light colors here again. He went for slightly lighter colors. We will continue using it this way, friends. That's all for this lesson. I think it was very useful. See you in the next lesson. Hello, friends. We recently looked at design examples related to artificial intelligence. We saw how it would be, how our scene should be, or how we would change the design with the reference examples we got from artificial intelligence. I created a design example according to my own style and changed the back part, especially the section where the TV is located. Friends. I placed a spotlight here. I put a spotlight at the end of the spotlight. The cats are here. As a lived experience, there is a shawl on the couch here. Friends. I placed the wooden parts here like this and made them a bit darker. I darkened the wood here. I used the same wood on the legs here. We made our curtains. I had shown the IES lights apart from the spotlights. Here, we saw our emissive lights, as you can see, friends. Then when we turned here, look at this part. I added accessories from the Cosmos library. The white ones are already accessories from the Cosmos library. I didn't touch this part much, friends. Here at the back, in the pot, we have flowers, as you can see. We continued by performing a process like this. This part remained black. Let's handle this part. So by selecting this part, let's also mark this part, friends. Let it stay there like this. There are areas where the coating hasn't been applied. The previous coatings remain. As you can see, I'm selecting from here. In these parts, I had mirrored. I made a mirror, friends. This part as well, like this. In these parts, I used mirrored glass form. These white parts are where the mirror is, friends. I placed spotlights here and made them yellow, friends. We have a little tip for spotlights, and I want to show it to you. When you go to the settings section and come to the spotlight, I set this unit part to power in spotlights at 5 watts level. So when it comes to this watt value, it is normally in the default section. I set it to the watt value from here. I made it 5 watts and set the follow-up part here to cubic. In other words, I made it soft. Look, I want to draw your attention to this part, friends. Look at this part now. When you set it to linear, it becomes sharp. That is, the outer part of the light. It becomes sharp. If you make this part smooth, it distributes smoothly. You can see it from here. Let me do it again. Look, it's sharp, but when it's smooth, there's a smoother, that is a softer distribution. That's why I make sure they are like this, especially when I use a spotlight. It looks better, friends. And one of the important settings, friends, now when you select the CUDA part, and while rendering here, if you select the processor and the graphics card, friends, if the white balance is set to auto. We were doing auto in our initial render tests. If you notice, our toning was turning blue, friends. We solved that. I did some research here. The white balance actually calculates incorrectly when CUDA is selected. I went to investigate what was causing that, and I found it. The white balance should not be set to auto, friends. Do not press the white balance. Let it stay white like this, friends. When you select CUDA, meaning when both the processor and graphics card are selected, you do not press the white balance. When exposure is set to auto, it adjusts the scene itself, meaning it sets it. Later we can adjust it ourselves, but if it's on auto, it automatically provides an image. When I come to this scene, and press here, friends, look, my scene is like this. Look, I'm turning on the denoise from here. I previously took a render. Look, we are faced with a clean, soft image like this. However, when you set the white balance to auto, our scene becomes completely blue, if you notice. That blueness is due to the light coming from outside, from the HDR, being reflected here as blue, friends. That's why such a situation occurs. I changed the textures. I added a bit of gold outside the TV screen for some variation. In this way, I tried to bring the design to a color harmony, friends. Since I will be giving you the scene anyway, you can use it in different, various ways as well. Look, there's something called filmic tone map here, friends. Look, when I check this, the toning changes. Look, I removed it. Let me remove it from here. I say delete. Look, when you press this plus icon, it says filmic tone map. When you check this, there are some types here. In other words, the contrast and softness of the work change. Look, I'm bringing it from here. I say hell. I say power curve. If you play with these, a completely different image emerges, friends. Look, I took this, for example. Let's say I took this, or let's say I took that, for example. From here, I can play with the whites, with the excess of light, or its distribution. Look, as you can see, I can leave it when I get it to the desired consistency, or when I come to exposure, if the exposure image, the light image, is not enough, I gradually increased it by saying 0.25. For example, I continued by increasing it one more tone by saying 0.50. If the contrast seems low, you can increase the contrast up to 0.50. Look, it's too much. I say 0.1. I say 0.2. I say 0.3. You can increase it this way. But of course, anything above 0.1 is a bit too much. I set it to 0.1. In the highlight section, we had prevented the outside light from blowing out. If this seems too much, you need to increase it to achieve this balance. Actually, all of these are interconnected. For example, let's set this to 0. Let's increase this a bit as well. Look, in this way, or when you press the plus sign and add a curve, the curve shows the distribution of the light in the scene graphically here. Do you see it, friends? For example, when you place a point here, look. Sorry, when you mark this area, a point will appear here. Look at that point. The distribution of the light, if this part is dark, I can reduce the darkness of that part by pulling this upwards. Look at the curvature of the scene here. Do you see the graph? The curvature of the graph. I can increase the amount of light there. It actually comes naturally. Look, when I pull it upwards, there will be a more natural development here. So, without overexposing this part, I increase the light here, friends. And in this way, I achieved a balance. If you play with these, look, the channel labeled master here is actually about changing all these red, green, and blue color channels. If you switch to red from here, you can increase or decrease the red part. In other words, you can increase or decrease the red tones. If you choose green, you can increase or decrease the greens. These are entirely up to you, friends. You can play with them if you want, or you can leave them as they are. But these are fine details. These are related to a more professional approach. When you say master, it involves a variability in the overall light distribution of the scene, friends. When I come to exposure, I can prevent the blowout by reducing the highlights again. If you want the blowout here to be less and more balanced, you can leave it at a certain level. This is the process, friends. Actually, your scene seems completely ready. Further development of the scene, is actually related to your perspective on the scene and taking renders from different angles. So when I come to the output section, as white, I take it in a 16:9 widescreen format, when it comes to the render output section. Look, there is a safe frame here, friends. The safe frame is related to the rendering section. Look, when I activate the safe frame, a black area appears here and also at the bottom. So it shows me the 16:9 ratio. But if I change it from here, I will change my rendering sections. In the next lesson, we will touch a bit on the camera sections, because the camera sections are important, friends. Whether for Instagram or social media, we need to change the aspect ratio there. That is a result we can achieve by changing the values here, friends. In the next lesson, we will continue by changing those parts. Hello, friends. Another important section is the render output part in the camera tab. Friends, this is the part where we will get the render output. Normally, many users not only render a single frame with the aim of explaining the entire area to the user. They take a single frame. However, we actually need to divide the scenes we render into multiple sections. These vary, for example, showing a general scene, or the area where the TV section is, or the area where the dining section is. However, the 16:9 widescreen image you have taken may not save you everywhere. So, when I take a 16:9 render from here, unless I render in a square or rectangular shape, the widescreen part will not save the screen I rendered, my friends. Therefore, I need to make a different render setting here. So, either I'm trying to show something vertical in a horizontal way. I want to show these vertical parts here, but I'm taking a render in a horizontal format. This actually shows that the technique is wrong for me. Here, I can select the widescreen part and take it in a square format, or by altering the ratio to 5:4 or 4:5. When I select 4:5, friends, look, due to the extension of the screen in this way, we can adjust our lens by pressing the lens icon here. See, it says 95 degrees. By writing 40 instead of 95 degrees, I get a bit closer. Look, normally in 4:5, meaning in an 8.1 ratio, it will render in this area here. I can extend this area and take a render like this. This falls into the category of more artistic, what we call artistic renders. These are important, friends. When I render this way, I only capture this part, and it doesn't show the other parts. When I select 1:1 from here, the screen will expand a bit more, and I will capture this area in full screen, friends. When I render this way, I can take a render that shows only the dining section without displaying the parts left outside proportionally, friends. On the screen, there's a slight Before we make our adjustments, we have color correction and different settings. I will show them, friends. If we first adjust these screen parts, we can continue without issues in the other parts. But the camera section, the camera tab, is really an important tab, friends. Also, it is beneficial to pay attention to the environmental elements around to enhance the ambience. Eye-catching, interesting portraits. In a living room, for example, we can create different objects like a robot, perform different operations. Friends, these are important. Look, we took these operations in close-up render. Towards the end of our lessons, I will publish a few lessons called Vray Tips, along with Vray Friends, both for making the settings quickly and for gaining practicality in some aspects. I will show them. For now, let's continue by taking this render here, friends. Let's see what kind of result will emerge. Yes, the rendering is continuing, friends. Let's check the denoiser here to produce a smoother render. Of course, in normal renders, we will continue by increasing the settings a bit more, friends. Look, we have a section like this here. We can significantly reduce the highlight burn here. If you want, you can increase it so that the effect outside is a bit less. If you want it to explode a bit more, this is the process, friends. We can also play with other parts. The settings we last made are evident here. Look, I can increase the light a bit more here like this, or I can decrease it, adjust its toning, or you can adjust the texture settings here, or in different ways. Here, there was a color correction section. Look, there is a color balance section and a hue saturation section. For example, when you come to the color balance section, you can play with the parts here, friends. Look, it says cyan and red here. You can change the color variables. However, there is something like this here, friends. While making adjustments, Some users increase these values in very decimal numbers. But the millimetric changes we make here cause an incredible image. Therefore, making small adjustments like this will be more beneficial. For example, if there is a slight yellowish tint, to counteract it, when you increase the yellow and blue section, with the right side being blue and the left side being yellow, the effect here will change. Look, I have slightly reduced that effect. There was a slight yellowish effect, and I have reduced it. This is the process, friends. 0.058. Look, this is like that too. This also has an effect like 0.097. For the rest, once you mark them, you will achieve beautiful results like this. Of course, the area you want to explain is very important. There is also this situation. I call this a stop, friends. In this section, you need to select the 2 viewpoint perspective option in the camera section so that your camera is fully vertical, friends. Look, when I select this, the camera becomes perfectly vertical. If you want, you can look from a bit higher up. After making the adjustments this way, it's enough to right-click on this part and press the update button. Once you do that, your scene will be saved in this way, friends. Now, here's the situation. In the extension section, save this, friends. When you enter the Vray section in the tools part, the object, here there's a batch render. In the rendering section, friends, there's a batch render part. If you click on the batch render section, it will take and save the scenes you have set up here, such as scene 1, scene 2, scene 5, 6, 3, and 4 in order. But before that, you need to specify the location, where your file path is saved in the Save Image section here. For example, if you save it as PNG in the Vray Living Room section, when you click on the Batch Render section, it will save all of these in order. Of course, before that, make sure your settings are set to CUDA here, and that your processor and graphics card are selected, and also ensure that you have reached the High Plus settings in the final settings. By making the final settings in the High Plus settings, it will provide you with the highest quality. Then you can continue by making the settings here, friends. Of course, the processor and graphics card are of great importance for render time in Vray. Your processor and graphics card need to be efficient. They need to be good, friends. If render times continue to take too long, you may ask, why is it taking me so long? Don't ask, well, render times in Vray normally take a long time, friends. So, rendering a scene like this in 4K resolution would take about an hour to an hour and a half on a good computer. On laptops, you can find render times reaching 2, 3, or even 4 hours for a single frame. That's why render times in Vray are a bit longer, friends. But the resulting output is quite satisfying. For example, when I go back to scene 1, if I render like this, I will only see this part. But I need to specify the area I want to show to the user in the scene. Like this, I come over here, and like this, for example, let's say I want to show this part with the table, meaning the part where the glass and the table are. But look, half of the table is left outside. I need to show the area. I want to display Matuche on the clear screen between these two black lines. Friends, look, I can show it like this, or even increase this area a bit more to show the couches. When I go to the settings section, when I select the 5x4 here, you'll see that the area has expanded a bit more, friends. When I zoom out a bit more with the lens, when I come back like this, I might have adjusted the area. When I set the camera to 2 viewpoint, it will perform an operation like this. In fact, later on, there's the depth of field technique here, friends. I will show that later. When you activate the depth of field technique here, the other parts of the area you marked will become blurred, allowing you to move towards a more artistic rendering. But I won't show that now. Rendering takes a very long time, friends. What you need to do here is to go to the High Plus settings at the final stage. Or, if you want the process to be faster, it's beneficial to go to the high settings and increase the resolution here. Friends, after increasing it and waiting for a certain period for rendering, you need to open the denoiser section here for the resulting output. Then you need to press the diskette icon here to save it, friends. As you can see, it saves this as a PNG here. The result that appears when saved will be the same as the result you see here. Sometimes, due to color tones, that is, because of the color calibration used by the monitor or the color palette used by Vray, the render result here may differ from the render result you saved. Don't be surprised by that, friends. You can adjust the colors of the resulting output again in Photoshop. Sometimes the results can come out differently, so don't be surprised about that at all, because the color palette used by V-Ray and the color palette, or the color codes used by Windows are somewhat different, let's say. There is a mismatch, a difference coming from there, friends. Sometimes such situations can occur, or when you see it here and send it to someone else. Via WhatsApp or different social media, the tones may appear different. That is normal. There is absolutely nothing unusual, friends. Don't be too surprised by it. We inform the user about such situations from the beginning, because in the renders you have taken, the color calibration of your monitor will be somewhat different from the color calibration of others. For those working at a professional level, there are color calibration devices, and color calibration is done with them. Friends, I won't delve too much into that topic, because they are both expensive devices and necessary for matching colors in printing, but they are not needed for us at the moment. You can bring them to a somewhat similar level in Photoshop. Right now, we are trying to achieve the highest quality result for a quality and realistic render in the shortest time possible. Because in render engines, V-Ray is now considered among the long-duration render engines, we need to set up the scene quickly and go directly to the result. But there's something I always say. While setting up the scene, work extensively on ambiance elements like color tones, quality materials, quality shading, and quality models, and then bring them into the final scene. You see the initial part of the scene and its final state, friends? Preparing the model and bringing them into harmony is a very different thing. That's why you need to work extensively on the scene. You need to research what is where, which color tones are suitable, contrast ratio, light ratios, which light should I use, what should I use. Actually, the things you will use and do are very simple. In our next lessons, I will explain by giving a general summary of the parts we have already done, friends. The other parts are already about using textures, assigning textures, and adjusting the lights and ambience inside. But in the next lesson, which is a summary of everything, I will explain the summary of all of them, friends. That's all for this lesson. See you in our next lesson. Goodbye, with love and respect. Yes, friends, with this episode, we are in the 23rd episode. If we want to
Subscribe to my
summarize,
channel.
you come here
And
to the
also
render
press
output
this
section
bell
of the
icon.
camera part. To close this save frame, it's enough to click on the tick. Here, friends, the camera tab closes. Let's move to scene 1 from here. Let's move to scene 2 like this, and see our scene in general, friends. Now, what are the main parts now we need to do, and that I will explain in summary, friends? If you want a scene to be effective, you need to create an effective design. You need to use effective models and effective textures, friends. As we said at the beginning, if this lesson is going to serve as a summary, as we mentioned at the start, quality design or quality modeling, quality model. Look, modeling and model. What is modeling? When designing in the style of group components, modeling the models in the style of groups and components, creating the CAD shell design, that is, designing the shell of the walls and subfloors and details like these, baseboards, or different details, then equipping them with quality models here. Then adjusting the quality ratios of the interior textures with the quality models we use, and equipping them with elements like spotlights, lights, hidden lighting, TV, accessories, and elements of lived-in feel, friends. If you do these, you will get a quality render regardless of which render engine you use. Friends, you will get all of them. But in V-Ray, we have a section in the render settings. When we come to the render settings, friends, what we will do here is that the high or high plus section here already changes our parts here. We will not make any adjustments here, friends. The section that explains the settings here, or the details of the settings, is the help booklet in V-Ray's own Chaos Group section. Everything is explained there. However, the difference between low and high plus in the quality section you have made here changes all the quality settings, friends. The reason we set the exposure value to auto here is this, friends. Look, when I set it to auto, it gives a value of 11.384. Increasing or decreasing this or is related to the light inside, either blowing out or increasing. Normally, when I come here, I can achieve the same effect by increasing it from the exposure here. Friends, that's why it's a more logical method to increase and decrease the exposure from here. The exposure there and the exposure here actually work on the same principle. It's a method that ensures the light inside the scene increases equally everywhere, friends. In Vray, when we set the exposure to auto, it means the scene lighting is adjusted automatically. Initially, we were setting the white balance to auto as well. We will not set it to auto. The blue causes the surroundings to become bluish, friends. That's why we will continue without setting these to auto. You can use the light as you wish. You can use sunlight. Look, when I go to the sunlight section, the intensity of the sun is at a level of 1. The shadow of the sun is at a level of 10. If you notice, there is a soft light inside. This is because the multiplier is set to 10. So, a sharp light is not coming inside, friends. A light with a soft shadow is coming in. So the shadow is very soft. Because it comes in extremely soft, a natural image is formed inside like this, friends. Apart from that, when we go outside, friends, look, as I always say, as we mentioned at the beginning of the lesson, there are 2 rectangle lights here, friends. There are also 2 here. These serve as supporting lights here. Inside, the IS lights, here and all the hidden lighting, inside actually add an ambience to this place. For example, if you want, there is a light strip we used here. You can also place a rectangle light facing downwards on this light strip. It would illuminate this part more, as if light is coming down from here. Because in the renders, even though there is light in front of this part, it didn't illuminate here much. We only increased the light here by playing with the curve value over there. This was my normal value. I increased the brightness level here by pulling it upwards like this. When your render resolution increases, you can also enhance it by adjusting these parts here. By unchecking these boxes here, you can see the effects. Friends, for example, look here. Let's say which one. I remove the denoiser. Let me remove this one too. Only the exposure should be active. Look, normally our render is like this. That is, when we first rendered it was like this. On top of that, a filmic tone is added. Color balance is added. A curve is added. Another curve is added. Lens effects come in. And denoiser is applied. Friends, the work evolves into a section like this. Your color success, your texture success, it actually shows that this part here, design is variable. A strong design will make the render even stronger. The other parts, like the book and object sections, are parts we created to strengthen the ambience a bit more. They are all the same, friends. In the following sections, I will talk a bit about the sites, where you can download free textures and models. Friends, they are also important. And when you purchase this set, I will give you 20 interior sets as a gift. You can use them in your scene as well. Now, there is an important part here, but I will explain it in the next lesson. It's a part related to this model, friends. See you in our next lesson. I think I have provided some important tips here. If you follow them, you will get very beautiful renders in all render engines, friends. Hello, friends. I want to talk about some important websites that will speed up your work here. These sites are tools aimed at speeding up your workflow and quickly finding what you want without searching for models, textures, or HDRs all over the place. Friends, one of them is SketchUpFreeModel.com, friends. FreeModel.com here is a site that contains models, both from us and those sent to us by users, friends. Completely free. You can use the models you download from here. Look, there are background images, here called background images. You actually have the chance to use background images in place of HDR in the background. Besides that, there are many models here. You can download and use these. Our second part is texture, texturefun.com. I had shown it before, friends. The textures, especially the wood textures, are very successful. You again have the chance to download these for free, friends. There is a mistake users make in the downloading section. When you enter the texture, friends, for example, at the bottom part, when choosing 1K, 2K, 4K, let's say you selected 2K. You wait, friends. After the seconds are over here, the download button appears here. Friends, This is very important. Look, normally you wait above, but it appears below. It gives a slight surprise. The download button is here. You can download it from here. Here, information is also provided on how the textures should be used. Friends, there is a texture site called Ambient CG, friends. Look, there are 2,283 here. There are very detailed textures here. You can use these as well. Look, when I enter the asset section, there are many detailed textures here. These are also free. You can use these. There is polyhaven.com. Polyhaven.com is the site where we downloaded our HDR, as you may know. Regarding that, look, there are HDR, textures, and models here, friends. If you enter the HDR section, there are HDRs. If you enter the texture section, there are textures. And if you enter the model section, there are models, friends. There are many materials here. The other one is 3dtextures.com, friends. Textures me is spelled as me. Here, friends, you can use the textures on the left side. There are quite detailed and high-quality textures available. Well, everyone knows 3D Warehouse as a model site. It's SketchUp's own site, friends. 3dwarehouse.sketchup.com. For SketchUp users, if your SketchUp is not original, 3D Warehouse will not work within SketchUp. You need to access 3dwarehouse.sketchup.com from your browser at this address. Another site is gtrader.com, friends. This site also sells paid models, but there are free models as well. It's enough to type your model or what you're searching for in the search section here. Or you can search for models from the sections below. Friends, all of these sites are important for your progress, friends. Sections with very high quality models, as well as textures and coatings, are the same. In summary, I want to give you a tip, friends. Normally, let's say the texture library inside Cosmos here, for example, the texture library here, or the texture library in Inkscape, when you use them, since they are used by everyone, the works produced always look the same in terms of visual familiarity. So most users use these, or I want to show you from the Inkscape library here. Where is Inkscape? Inkscape's own thing is here. Since they used these from the texture library in the Inkscape library, here, the resulting works are always identical to each other. Even if the design is different, what happens when you use the same texture? Well, this time, everything looks similar, friends. To break this similarity, you can download textures from the texture sites here. For example, let's say you came here. You used the textures by downloading them from Polyhaven in the textures section here. Since not many people know about these sites, and the textures here are of high quality, it will also affect the quality of your work. So, continue using the sites here, friends. There are very high quality models, very high quality textures, and materials available. Using these will make your work more realistic and of higher quality. In our next lesson, I will talk about direct SketchUp tips, friends. They are also somewhat important, because if you apply them at the beginning while setting up, you will achieve very fast results. Hello, friends. In this episode, I want to talk to you about the tips in the SketchUp Vray section. Vray has some tips within itself, friends. One of them is this. When you click on Frame Buffer and go to the Layer Stat section, at the top from the General section, friends, look at the render time here. 2 minutes and 31 seconds. You can see the render time from here. Render time is important for Vray, friends, because renders take a bit longer compared to other software like Twinmotion, D5, and Enscape. People are curious about the render times, friends. In the other section, when you go to the Vray menu from the extension part, friends, the About section under Help shows the version of Vray we are using, 6.20.01. Since Vray versions are constantly dealing with bugs, new updates are released frequently. You might be curious about your own update. When you look here, you can see your own version, friends. When I go back to the Vray section from the extension part, and click on the Pack Project section here, friends, it actually packages the file in a zip format. The reason it compresses the file here is so that when you take it to another place or open it on another computer, the same settings and textures will be available. When you save it, it saves in a zipped format, and you can open it when you send it to a different location. This is an important part, friends. You can use it if you want to transfer the file. In this way, you definitely need to do it from here. With the settings, friends,
Because if you use Save As from the File menu and save the file differently, the settings and textures will not be included. Avoid any issues. When transferring, make sure to go to the Vray Pack Project section in the extension part, friends. In the other part, from the Preferences section of Vray, if you are using Inkscape, check the Inkscape compatibility option here to ensure the settings are compatible with Inkscape, friends. And then, if you have made settings in Inkscape and want those settings to be active in Vray, check the Inkscape settings option here so that the settings you made in Inkscape become active here. This is also an important part, friends. In another part of Vray, there was a setting here, friends. I want to show it to you. In the Tools section, yes, you go to the External section. There is GPU device selection, friends. This part currently means it is checked. Here, if you don't want to constantly set this part to CUDA in the Settings section, friends, you need to select this part here. So I came here. In the Object section, in the Tools section, I selected the GPU device from the External section. When you select CUDA from the part that comes from here and mark these parts, friends, you no longer feel the need to select CUDA from there repeatedly. When you close this, every time you come here, CUDA is automatically marked here, friends. This is an important part. Instead of constantly pressing CUDA, it's logical to mark it once and press Render, friends. That's why these are important parts. I'm looking to see if there's anything else. What else could there be, friends? I'm checking for anything else. We showed this. The Batch Render section automatically renders all the scenes. Before that, you need to click Save As and save it somewhere. I also showed that in the Settings section, friends. Other than that, we don't have any other issues, friends. All of them, or the lights and objects we use, are the parts explained in the menu here, friends. The Vray Tips series is like this, friends. In our next episode, we will be heading towards the end. I can show batch render, but for now, we need to take sequential renders for batch render. Let's set the settings to low, 8, and see the batch render section, 8, friends. At least you all got to see how it takes a sequential render. That's all for this lesson. Hello, friends. In this lesson, I want to show you the batch render, which is the sequential render part. In the sequential render part, you need to create your scenes in this way. Creating a scene is one of the basic parts in SketchUp, friends, because without creating a scene, batch render won't know which scene to render. To save the scene, friends, you press the plus icon. It saves the scene, and the scene name appears here, friends. You can also change the scene name by right-clicking here. Be careful not to use Turkish characters, friends. After creating the scene, if you click on the two-point perspective from the camera section, your scene will be perfectly vertical. Apart from that, you need to come to the Vray Asset Editor here and open the Save Image section. Friends, normally this is closed. You need to open it by pressing the button here. You need to mark where you want to save your file. In the next part, friends, make your settings. Set your settings to high or high plus and increase the ratio of 1920 by 1080 here. Why increase it? Because the resolution is at 1K value. This is the test render we have done, friends. By increasing this, you can get it at 2K and 4K ratios. But if you want to change the resolution, you can render each frame at a 1:1 ratio like this. But after doing these, for example, after saying update in scene 7, when I move to scene 3, friends, since the settings for scene 3 will be different, you need to apply the same settings there and say update on it. This is also an important part, friends. Therefore, after making settings between scenes, it is beneficial to click on it and say update. Friends, in the batch render section, look, I came to scene 3 like this. In scene 3, it also sees my settings at a 1:1 ratio like this. It has been set to view the scene from under the plant. You can make a setting like this. Batch render is an ideal method to avoid waiting in front of the computer, friends. Therefore, you can also use batch render. That's all for this lesson. See you in our other lessons. Goodbye. Hello, friends. We are slowly approaching the end of our lessons, friends.
Subscribe to
In
my
the settings,
channel.
in the final settings,
And
there is a
also
part
press
I want
this
to show
bell
you, and it's an
icon.
important part. Normally, with progressive rendering, while you are rendering, this part is open. Having this part open causes you to render in the style we call progressive rendering. So there is a difference between progressive and bucket style rendering, which appears as small boxes on the screen.
All the renders I have shown in our lessons were rendered progressively, friends, because we use progressive rendering to quickly create the effects we need to see in the scene. In the final step, we remove the checkmark here, friends. We can then adjust to the settings you want here and proceed with rendering. And then the rendering composed of buckets, which we call bucket rendering, comes into play. I will show it shortly. Look, let's set this to low, and to quickly demonstrate this part from the settings, I'm doing it like this. Friends, 1:1. I'm setting these settings to 800 by 800. Look, I have set it to the lowest settings on low, friends. Here's the difference between progressive and normal rendering. Look, friends, when I switch to progressive rendering, I start the render. Look, to show the difference between the two, because this is an important topic, friends. Look, friends, in progressive rendering, there is a part that is continuously illuminated and constantly processing. Look, here we don't see the buckets, and in progressive rendering, there's a brighter situation. You need to adjust this brightness yourself between progressive rendering and bucket rendering, friends. Because look, for example, the exposure values here are at 1.5. For instance, let me set it to 1.1 here, friends, or let me set it to 0. In this case, the values in the buckets can be a bit different, friends. Therefore, it is beneficial to increase the values here. Look, in bucket rendering, in progressive rendering, the render is finished, friends. It immediately showed you the scene. It opened the user again and automatically showed you the value of the scene at this setting and this toning. This is the purpose of progressive rendering, to show you this. But for example, look, I'm turning off the progressive rendering. I came here and pressed the render button. Friends, now there will be a render starting with buckets. The buckets we refer to are the little boxes, friends. The large boxes are the graphics cards boxes, and the small boxes are the processors boxes. Since we are using CUDA, those boxes will process these parts one by one, square by square, and give us the normal result of the render. There is a clear quality difference between progressive and bucket rendering, friends. Well, in bucket rendering, it takes 2 to 3 times longer. That's why in the final render, you need to turn off your progressive rendering. Look now. Now I want to show you how the buckets work, friends. I want to show you how those boxes work. This is an important part. So you can use it to quickly get renders from progressive rendering. You can use it to see the effect of the scene, you know, that feature. But the bucket, a bucket process we mentioned, starts in the final render. See, did you notice, friends? Look, there are squares here. Look, it's rendering quickly. Do you see? The large ones are the graphics card. The small ones are the processor's buckets, friends. By rendering in this way, it brings us the final state of the scene. Since we are rendering at the lowest setting, which we call low, it renders quickly like this. Now I'm going to give you a tip, friends. In high render, there's no need to do high plus. You don't need to set the settings to high plus, friends. Let the render finish, then I'll show you a part. You can also render there, friends. Now look, the render is finishing. Again, the situations here will become active. Look, the test user has become active. This is the render taken in bucket. Actually, the difference between the two, friends, is clearly noticeable. It might not be clearly visible on the screen right now, but there is a difference between progressive and bucket. Now, there's a situation like this. In the final render, friends, you brought this low and made it high. If you do high plus, the values here increase significantly. But if you make it high and set the noise limit value here to 0.05, friends, the noise limit is this. The photon particles falling with the light on the screen adjust the frequency of the photon particles, which we cannot currently see with the naked eye. The better this frequency is, the clearer image you get, in dark areas. That's why this part is important, friends. What did I do? Look, when I changed that, it switched to the custom section. Now I can render by adjusting the resolution as I wish from here, friends. I took a render regarding the render time. Let me show you the render I took. To avoid waiting too long, let's go to the desktop. I had a render named 002. Here. 003. Sorry. Look, this is a render like this. I will show how to do this render in Photoshop. Look, we have a soft render. It has a slight yellowish tint. It has a slight effect of the sun, you know. But if you want, you can change these by playing with color correction. So there's no problem at all. If it turns too blue, you can change it to yellowish. If it's too yellowish, you can turn it back to the main tones, the normal tones. In the next lesson, I will show how to enhance this effect, how to do it. Those who know Photoshop are already familiar with this, but for those who don't know, I will show a brief interaction. You can take different renders from different angles. I had shown vertical and square ones.
In our next lesson, we will continue with Photoshop summaries. Friends, that's all for this lesson. See you in the next lesson. Hello, friends. We will try to create a more vibrant and effective image by slightly altering one of the render images we have taken in Photoshop. Friends, normally you can see that the resolution of the image we have taken is 2K by looking at the image size from the image section. The resolution value is 72 zoom pixels. Look, it appears as 2K here. Actually, whether this image has a blue tint or a yellowish tint from the render images we have taken doesn't change much, but a slight dominance here allows us to change it, friends. In summary, we can also ensure that the texture overlays are more dominant. My Photoshop is in Turkish because I use Adobe originally, so it chose the Turkish language according to our country, supposedly, friends. You have the option to change it, but since it's a bit troublesome, I didn't bother much with it. But for now, when you come to the camera raw filter from the sky filter section, you can change many parts. You don't need to know Photoshop. If you say auto, it automatically adjusts towards the dominant color as soon as you say auto. Or from this profile section, you clicked on these 4 profiles next to the color, friends. Look, there are different dominances in the modern section here. Look, and it changes the tone to a slight blue dominance, or more like a transitional dominance. Normally, then this is my tone. Look, when I come here, I can see different tones. Look, this one is more dominant, friends, as a dream. For example, when you enter here, you can change the amount. So you can change the dominance here. I don't want any of these. I said, back again, friends. Look, now, let me go to the color section from this part here. I came to my own profile section. Here, friends, in the light section, look here at the top. It says exposure in the exposure section. If you feel that the light is low, you can slightly increase these parts. So it's beneficial to increase it just a little bit, friends. In the contrast section, if you want the dominance of colors and textures, the dominance of light tones, the increase of light on shadows, look, pay attention to this part in the shadows, friends. Look, the light in the shadow is increasing, but since there is equal light everywhere, it's actually not very appropriate to increase it too much, because the light in the dark areas and the light where the light falls here would be different, because naturally it needs to be this way. You need to adjust its toning, so there's no need to increase it too much. Increasing the light concerning the whites, I mean, look, when I increase the whites in this part, the areas close to white tones, you see it causes a blowout, or the increase in blacks, or having lower light in the blacks. We can work on these by familiarizing our eyes and choosing whichever seems more suitable to us. Generally, friends, when doing a process here, I don't recommend doing Photoshop after long render work in Photoshop, because your eyes get tired with your concentration breaks, and at the final stage, where you should be making the impactful effect, you can't do it here. It would be better to do it after taking a short break. In the color section, friends, in this color section, if there's a slight yellowish tint, you can slightly pull it to the left to achieve a light blue. Look, we achieve a nice tone with numbers like -3, -4. You can break the slight yellowish tint given by the sun. I won't play around with these too much, but this temperature value is sufficient for us. Look, when I increase it, exaggerate it, or decrease it, this is the effect we get, friends. -3, like, -1, -2, -3 will do the job for us, friends. The important part in the effects section is this texture part. The texture part actually increases the clarity of the textures here, as the name suggests. Friends, look, I'm going to exaggerate a bit now. Did you see how exaggerated the situation became? Here, actually, something like this might be possible. If you take it to the Color ID channel and select only this part, you can separate this section, friends. But as I said, there's no need to increase these too much. Increasing it like this will be sufficient. Look, it's the same in the clarity section. In the clarity section, it actually increases the clarity and makes the contrast a bit more dominant. This is a bit according to your preference. I mean, some people prefer a softer image while others prefer a more dominant image. It's a matter related to this. This curve part is the effect we use in Photoshop or Vray in the frame buffer. Friends, look, this light, we can create the light naturally from the inside. For example, from here or here, I can leave it with an effect like this, as you can see. This is the old version and this is the new version. like this, friends, you can do something like this. I mean, there are a lot of details here, friends. By using these, you can bring your image from this part to that part. Look, it's more vibrant, as you can see. There's a more vibrant effect, especially in the TV section. But when you click OK here, the process is completed, as you can see. There are veined flags appearing here. I actually had a PNG, but if you save this image in TIFF or JPEG format, you'll encounter a nicer image, friends. Actually, our image looks quite clear and high quality, even though it's in 2K. I would reluctantly like to get 4K, but in Vray, 4K really takes a long time. Even this took an hour and a half on my computer, friends, in single frame renders. Let's see which different frames we took last. Well, there's the 04, so there's something different. There is 03. I had shown it. In 04, we took a frame like this, as you can see, friends. So as I said, this is, of course, old. I had changed this part here, friends. For example, if you want to perform a very quick operation from the filter section here, if you want to quickly provide a visual to the client, you can come to the auto section here and slightly increase the exposure and then adjust the warmth in the color section by pulling it a bit to this side. And depending on how the toning looks to you, make changes accordingly, friends, by doing it this way. And then, if you select Smart Sharpening from the Sharpening section, in the Filter section, well, here, look now, lakum. Let's get a bit closer here. Look, this is the old version and this is the new version, friends, much clearer. So this amount section actually determines our sharpening amount for us. Look, when I press on it, it looks blurry, and when I release it, it looks sharper. Let me increase this a bit. Did you see? But increasing it too much is not good, so it's enough to keep it around here. The radius determines the distribution according to the object. When I say OK, it actually makes distant objects appear clearer, friends. An important part. I mean, most people who use Photoshop probably know this, but I wanted to explain it anyway for beginners or those who are new to Photoshop, friends. In this way, we can get our images in higher quality more beautifully. As I said, taking renders frame by frame is more logical, friends. We currently have a render in progress. Look, I took a render from above, a bird's eye view render. Renders really take a long time in Vray, friends. By taking our renders this way and doing small edits in Photoshop, then actually part of the work happens here. This is the Vray frame buffer window, friends. So part of the work happens here. By changing and adding these, we can alter our toning and work, friends. Hello, friends. In this final lesson,
Hey there.
I will suggest
Subscribe
saving the
to my
file we
channel
saved as PNG
and also
as a
press
TIFF.
this bell icon.
When you save as TIFF, friends, as you can see here, you can save these files as 0, 0.3 TIFF, 0.05 TIFF, and 0.06 TIFF in this way. The same saving process, friends. When you come here, it's enough to select TIFF from the bottom part after pressing the disk icon in the Vray menu. When you save the TIFF, when you select it, friends, you can process this color concept, color, information, better in Photoshop. Now, I want to give a second tip, friends, in our final lesson. Now, regarding the texture information you use within the render engines I explained earlier, friends, try to use the texture sites I have provided to you as much as possible. The distinction here is this. Whether it's the texture library you used from the Cosmos library, or the library you used from the Enscape library, or other render engines, friends, people and designers using this often use the same material from the same place, which makes the designs look similar to each other. To break out of that monotony, try to create more diverse works by downloading textures from the free model, sites I showed earlier, friends. Many people use the ready-made textures available here. There is a situation I have experienced. Make sure to download your own textures from outside and try to use them in Vray, friends. This is valid for all render engines. I believe the information I provided is important. Good luck to everyone. If you want to ask questions via WhatsApp or other platforms, you can reach out to me, friends. On the homepage of our website, uselegitimesettler.com, there is a WhatsApp section. In situations where you can't find a solution, you can also contact me via WhatsApp, friends. Greetings and regards again. See you in other training sets. Goodbye. Love and respect, friends.